The dust-covered girl's small fists knocked on the weathered cabin door, with the desperation of someone who had nowhere else to turn. At barely 10 years old, she had already learned that survival meant swallowing pride and begging for scraps of work from strangers. Every door in the frontier settlement had slammed shut in her face, every household declaring they had no need for another mouth to feed. When the massive Apache warrior opened his door, she expected the same rejection she had received from everyone else. His dark eyes studied her torn dress and bare feet, taking in the obvious signs of a child abandoned by the world. But instead of turning her away, he spoke words that would change both their lives forever. Only position left is daughter. What happens when two broken souls from different worlds discover that family isn't about blood, but about choosing to protect each other? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The worn leather boots on her feet told a story of their own. They had belonged to her mother, Sarah Matthews, and were now the only tangible memory Emma carried of the woman who had died from fever 3 months ago. The boots were too large, stuffed with rags, to keep them from slipping off her thin feet, but they represented the last connection to a time when someone had cared whether she lived or died. Joseph Stone Bear studied the child before him with eyes that had seen too much violence and loss. At 35, he carried himself with the measured grace of a man trained in warfare, his broad shoulders and weathered hands speaking to years of hard living on the frontier. The cabin behind him was sparse but clean, built with his own hands after he'd left his position as a cavalry scout for the U.S. Army. That departure had been born of betrayal and disillusionment, when the same government he'd served had turned against his people during the Apache conflicts of the previous decade. He had withdrawn to this isolated patch of land, 20 miles from the nearest settlement, seeking peace in solitude. The irony wasn't lost on him that his first visitor in 6 months was a white child, one of the people whose ancestors had taken everything from his own family. Yet looking into her green eyes, he saw something he recognized, the hollow stare of someone who had lost everything and was still trying to survive. "What's your name, little one?" His voice carried the slight accent of someone who had learned English as a second language, though he spoke it perfectly after years in the cavalry. "Emma," she whispered, clutching a small bundle that contained her few remaining possessions. "Emma Matthews. I can work hard, sir. I can cook and clean and tend animals. I don't eat much, and I won't be any trouble." Joseph had heard variations of this speech before, from other desperate souls seeking refuge or employment, but there was something different about this child, something in her posture that spoke of determination rather than mere desperation. She wasn't begging, she was negotiating. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked, noting the gaunt hollows in her cheeks. "Yesterday morning," she admitted, then quickly added, "But I'm not weak, I can still work." Joseph stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter the cabin. The interior was Spartan but comfortable, with handmade furniture and Apache decorations that reflected his heritage. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace he'd built, and the smell of venison stew filled the air. Emma hesitated at the threshold. Experience had taught her to be wary of kindness from strangers, especially men, but the aroma of food and the warmth radiating from inside overcame her caution. She stepped across the threshold, her mother's boots making soft sounds on the wooden floor. "Sit," Joseph said, indicating a chair near the fire. "We'll talk after you've eaten." As Emma consumed the first real meal she'd had in days, Joseph observed her carefully. She ate with desperate hunger, but also with surprising manners, as if someone had once taken the time to teach her proper behavior. When she finished, she immediately stood and began clearing the dishes, without being asked. "You said you needed a daughter," Emma said, as she worked, her voice carefully neutral. "What happened to your real daughter?" The question hit Joseph like a physical blow. He turned away, staring out the window at the mountain vista beyond. "I never had children. My wife—" He paused, the words still difficult after all these years. My wife died before we could have a family. Emma continued washing the dishes in the basin of warm water, giving him space to compose himself. When she finished, she turned to face him directly. I don't have anyone either, she said simply. My mother died of fever. My father was killed in a mining accident when I was 7. There's no one left who cares if I live or die. Joseph studied this small, fierce child who spoke of her isolation with such matter-of-fact acceptance. In her, he saw an echo of his own loneliness, the particular pain of being utterly alone in the world. If you stay here, he said slowly, you won't be a servant. You'll be family. Do you understand the difference? Emma nodded, though Joseph suspected she didn't fully comprehend what he was offering. She had spent the last 3 months learning that survival required making herself useful to others. The concept of being valued simply for existing was foreign to her recent experience. I understand, she said, and I want to stay if you'll have me. Joseph felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the protective walls he'd built around his heart. Looking at this brave, lonely child, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Then, welcome home, daughter. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Emma felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since her mother's death. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally belonging somewhere again. That night, as Emma slept on a makeshift bed near the fireplace, wrapped in one of Joseph's wool blankets, both of them understood that something profound had begun. They were two souls who had lost everything, choosing to rebuild their lives together. It wouldn't be easy, and the world outside Joseph's cabin wouldn't understand or accept their unconventional family. But in that moment, surrounded by warmth and safety, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Joseph sat by the fire long into the night, watching over the sleeping child and wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had lived alone for 5 years, answering to no one and responsible for nothing beyond his own survival. Now he found himself the guardian of a 10-year-old girl who would depend on him for everything from food and shelter to guidance and protection. The responsibility was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. As he finally banked the fire and prepared for sleep, Joseph whispered a prayer to the spirits of his ancestors, asking for wisdom and strength to be the father this child deserved. The next morning would bring the first real test of their new relationship. But tonight, for the first time in years, neither of them slept alone. The morning sun streaming through the cabin's windows found Emma already awake, sitting quietly by the dying fire and watching Joseph sleep. She had spent most of the night in a state of anxious alertness, half convinced she would wake to find this kindness had been a dream. But the solid reality of the cabin around her, the lingering warmth of the blanket, and the gentle sound of Joseph's breathing confirmed that she had truly found sanctuary. When Joseph stirred and opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Emma's solemn face watching him with cautious hope. He stretched slowly, his joints protesting the night spent on the hard floor. He had given Emma his bed, insisting the makeshift arrangement by the fire was temporary until he could build her a proper sleeping space. "Good morning, daughter," he said softly, testing how the word felt in the morning light. Emma's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire appearance. "Good morning, Papa," she replied, the word escaping before she could stop herself. She immediately looked embarrassed at her presumption. Joseph felt his heart clench at the sound. "Papa," he repeated thoughtfully. "I like that." As they shared breakfast, cornbread and honey, fresh milk from Joseph's cow, they began the delicate process of learning to live together. Emma insisted on helping with the cooking and cleaning, her need to contribute warring with Joseph's desire to simply let her be a child. They compromised, with Emma taking on age-appropriate tasks, while Joseph handled the heavier work. "Tell me about your mother," Joseph said as they worked together to tidy the cabin. Emma's hands stilled on the quilt she was folding. "She was beautiful," she said finally. "She had yellow hair like mine, and she sang while she worked. She taught me to read and write, and she made the most wonderful apple pies." Her voice grew softer. She got sick so fast. One day she was fine, and 3 days later she was gone. Joseph nodded, understanding the particular pain of sudden loss. My wife was called Morning Star, he offered in return. She died in childbirth, along with our son. That was 7 years ago. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, each processing the other's grief and the shared understanding it created between them. When the cabin was clean and the morning chores finished, Joseph made a decision. "Come," he said, leading Emma outside to where a small shed stood behind the cabin. "There's something I want to show you." Inside the shed, on a workbench lit by the morning sun streaming through a window, sat an array of woodworking tools and several partially completed projects. Joseph picked up a small carved figure, a horse in mid-gallop, its mane flowing behind it. "I made this for a child I thought I might have someday," he said, offering it to Emma. "I think it belongs with you now." Emma accepted the carving with reverence, running her fingers over the smooth wood and admiring the intricate details. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "You made this?" Joseph nodded. "My father taught me to work with wood when I was young. It helps me think, and it keeps my hands busy during the long winter evenings. Could you teach me?" Emma asked hopefully. Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I think I'd like that very much." They spent the morning in the workshop, Joseph showing Emma how to hold the tools properly and letting her help sand some of the rough edges on a small box he was making. Her concentration was intense, her small tongue poking out slightly as she focused on following his instructions exactly. As they worked, Joseph found himself marveling at how naturally Emma fit into his solitary routine. She asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to his answers, and showed a quick intelligence that reminded him of his late wife. More importantly, her presence filled a silence in his life that he hadn't realized was so complete until it was broken. By noon, they had completed the small wooden box together. Joseph lined it with soft cloth and presented it to Emma as a place to keep her treasures. "Every daughter needs a place for her special things," he said. Emma carefully placed the wooden horse inside, along with a few other small items from her bundle. A button from her mother's dress, a smooth stone she'd found by a creek, and a pressed flower from her mother's garden. As she closed the lid, she looked up at Joseph with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Papa," she said, "for everything." Joseph knelt down to her level, placing his large, curled hands gently on her small shoulders. "Emma, I want you to understand something important. You're not here because I pity you or because I need a worker. You're here because I choose you to be my daughter, and I hope you choose me to be your father. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who decide to love and protect each other." Emma nodded solemnly, then threw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Joseph held her close, breathing in the scent of soap and sunshine in her hair, and felt the last of his emotional walls crumble. This child, this brave, bright little girl, had somehow managed to heal a wound in his heart that he'd thought would never mend. As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, 8 of them felt the solid certainty of belonging. They were family now, bound not by blood, but by choice and love. The challenges that lay ahead, the suspicious neighbors, the cultural barriers, the simple daily work of learning to live together would test that bond. But in this moment, surrounded by the vast beauty of the mountain wilderness, Emma and Joseph had found in each other exactly what they needed: a home. Emma carefully placed her wooden horse on the mantelpiece that evening, positioning it so the firelight would catch its carved mane. It was the first decoration she had contributed to their home, a small but significant mark of her belonging. As she prepared for bed in the small alcove Joseph had sectioned off for her privacy, she felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her mother's death. "Pop," she called softly from her bed. "Yes, daughter. Will you tell me a story?" Joseph smiled in the darkness. "What kind of story would you like to hear?" "Tell me about the Apache people," she said. "Tell me about your family." Joseph settled into the chair beside her bed, his voice taking on the cadence of traditional storytelling as he began to share the legends and history of his people. As Emma drifted off to sleep, lulled by his deep voice and the crackling of the fire, she felt truly safe for the first time in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the beginning of their real journey together. But tonight, they were simply a father and daughter, sharing stories and building the foundation of a love that would prove strong enough to overcome any obstacle the world might place in their path. The morning after Emma's first night in Joseph's cabin, she woke before dawn to find him already tending the fire. She had slept better than she had in months, wrapped in the warmth and safety of having someone watching over her. But with daylight came uncertainty about what was expected of her in this new arrangement. "Good morning, Papa," she said hesitantly, testing whether the intimacy of the previous evening would survive the practical realities of morning. Joseph's face softened at the sound. "Good morning, Emma. Did you sleep well?" She nodded, then immediately began looking around for tasks to perform. Old habits from her months of seeking work died hard, and she felt the need to prove her worth through usefulness. "What would you like me to do today?" she asked, already moving toward the kitchen area. Joseph watched her anxious energy with understanding. "First, we eat breakfast together. Then I'll show you around the property so you know where everything is. After that, we'll figure out how to make this work for both of us." As they prepared breakfast together, Emma insisting on helping despite Joseph's gentle protests that she didn't need to earn her keep, they began the delicate dance of learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. Emma was surprised Joseph's patience when she spilled flour on the counter, and Joseph was touched by her determination to contribute despite her obvious exhaustion. "Emma," he said, as they sat down to eat, "I want you to understand something. You're not here to work for me. You're here to be my daughter. That means your job is to learn and grow and be a child." Emma frowned, stirring her porridge thoughtfully. "But I need to help. I can't just take without giving something back." Joseph recognized the survival mentality that had kept her alive during her months alone. "You're giving me something very valuable," he said quietly. "You're giving me the chance to be a father. That's worth more than any amount of work." After breakfast, Joseph gave Emma a tour of his small homestead. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, with a vegetable garden, a small barn that housed his cow and 2 horses, and the workshop where they had worked together the day before. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, providing fresh water and a place for fishing. "This is all ours?" Emma asked, clearly amazed by the concept of owning land. "Ours," Joseph confirmed. "I bought this section from the government, with my army pay. It's not much, but it's enough for a family." Emma ran ahead to explore the creek, her laughter echoing through the trees as she discovered a family of ducks paddling in a quiet pool. Joseph watched her with growing affection, seeing glimpses of the carefree child she might have been under different circumstances. When they returned to the cabin, Joseph pulled out a small piece of wood and his carving knife. "Would you like to learn to make something?" he asked. Emma's eyes lit up with interest. Under Joseph's patient guidance, she began learning to carve a simple wooden doll. The work required concentration and patience, qualities that came naturally to her, despite her young age. As she worked, she began to relax, the anxious tension that had gripped her since her mother's death slowly easing. "You have good hands for this work," Joseph observed, watching her careful movements with the knife. Steady and sure, Emma glowed under his praise, unused to having an adult notice her capabilities rather than her deficiencies. "My mother always said I was good with my hands. She taught me to sew and knit. We'll continue those lessons too," Joseph promised. "A person should know how to create beautiful things, not just useful ones." As the afternoon wore on, Emma found herself talking more freely than she had since her mother's death. She told Joseph about her favorite books, about the songs her mother used to sing, about her dreams of maybe becoming a teacher someday. Joseph listened with the full attention of someone who understood the gift of being trusted with another person's hopes. When evening came, Emma helped Joseph prepare dinner, their movements beginning to show the coordination of people learning to share space comfortably. As they sat by the fire after the meal, Emma working on her wooden doll while Joseph carved a larger piece, the silence between them was comfortable, rather than awkward. "Papa?" Emma said eventually, using the title that was becoming more natural each time she spoke it. "Yes, daughter. Are you lonely living out here by yourself?" Joseph considered the question seriously. "I was," he said finally. "I didn't realize how lonely until you arrived and reminded me what it felt like to have family." Emma nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "I was lonely too, even when there were other people around. I felt like I was invisible." "You're not invisible here," Joseph assured her. "Here you matter more than anything else in the world." As Emma drifted off to sleep that night, she clutched the half-finished wooden doll to her chest. It was rough and imperfect, but it was hers, made with her own hands under the guidance of someone who cared about her success. For a child who had lost everything, the simple act of creating something new felt like a miracle. Joseph sat by the fire long after Emma fell asleep, whittling away at a small project of his own. In his hands, a delicate wooden flower took shape, its petals carefully carved to catch and hold the firelight. Tomorrow, he would give it to Emma as a reminder that beautiful things could grow even in the harshest soil. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. Winter would come soon, and with it the long months when they would depend entirely on each other for companionship and comfort. But tonight, as Joseph listened to Emma's peaceful breathing and felt the solid satisfaction of meaningful work in his hands, he felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They were building something together, something more precious than anything either of them had possessed alone. Day by day, conversation by conversation, they were creating the family both of them had lost and desperately needed. It was fragile still, this new bond between them, but it was growing stronger with each shared meal, each story told by firelight, each moment of choosing to trust and care for each other. The wooden doll that Emma clutched in her sleep would be finished within the week, painted with berry juice and dressed in scraps of cloth from Joseph's sewing box. But more importantly, the trust between them was taking shape as well, carved with patience and attention from the raw material of their mutual need and growing affection. 2 weeks into their new life together, Emma woke to the sound of voices outside the cabin. She crept to the window and peered through the curtains to see 3 men on horseback, talking with Joseph by the barn. Even from a distance, she could sense the tension in their postures and the unfriendly tone of their conversation. Joseph's voice carried clearly in the morning air, calm but with an edge of steel underneath. "I appreciate your concern, gentlemen, but my family arrangements are my own business." One of the men, a heavy-set rancher Emma recognized from town, dismounted and stepped closer to Joseph. "Stone Bear, you can't seriously think it's appropriate for a man like you to be raising a white child. People are talking." Emma felt her stomach clench with familiar fear. She had heard similar conversations before, adults discussing her future as if she weren't a real person with feelings and preferences. But this time she had someone standing between her and those who would make decisions about her life. "Let them talk," Joseph replied, his tone growing colder. "Emma is my daughter now, and I'll thank you to refer to her as such." "Now see here," the second man interjected, "we know you mean well, but this arrangement isn't natural. That child belongs with her own kind, in a proper Christian home." Emma saw Joseph's hands clench into fists at his sides, though his voice remained controlled. "Her own kind? She's a child who needed a home, and I provided one. What's unnatural about protecting someone who needs protection?" The third man, younger than the others, and clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, tried to mediate. "Joseph, Maybe if you just let the pastor's wife take a look at the situation, make sure the girl is being properly cared for. Are you suggesting I'm not capable of caring for my own daughter? Joseph's voice now carried a dangerous quiet that made even Emma shiver. Unable to bear listening from hiding any longer, Emma made a decision that surprised even herself. She opened the cabin door and walked out to stand beside Joseph, her chin raised defiantly despite the trembling in her legs. "These are my father's," she announced, her young voice carrying clearly across the yard. "He takes good care of me, and I don't want to live anywhere else." The three men stared at her in obvious discomfort, clearly not having expected to be confronted by the child herself. Emma could see them taking in her clean dress, her healthy appearance, and the obvious confidence with which she positioned herself next to Joseph. "Now, little girl," the heavy-set man said in the patronizing tone adults often used with children, "you might think you're happy here, but you don't understand what's best for you. Children need proper guidance and Christian instruction." Emma felt anger flare in her chest, the same protective fury she had seen in Joseph's eyes. "I get plenty of guidance," she said firmly. "Papa teaches me things every day. He's teaching me to carve and to track animals and to understand the plants that grow in the forest. He reads to me every night and helps me with my letters." Joseph placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder, drawing strength from her fierce loyalty, even as he worried about exposing her to this confrontation. "Gentlemen," he said with finality, "Emma has spoken for herself, as have I. I suggest you respect our decision and our privacy." The heavy-set man mounted his horse with obvious frustration. "This isn't over, Stone Bear. People won't stand for this kind of arrangement indefinitely." As the three men rode away, Emma felt her knees go weak with the aftermath of adrenaline. Joseph immediately knelt beside her, his face creased with concern. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said gently. "And I'm sorry you felt you needed to defend our family." Emma straightened her shoulders, some of Joseph's own steel entering her voice. "They were wrong about you, and they were wrong about us. I wasn't going to let them say those things without speaking up." Joseph felt a swell of pride mixed with worry. Emma's courage was admirable, but he knew their confrontation with the men was only the beginning of the challenges they would face. That afternoon, as they worked together in the garden harvesting the last of the summer vegetables, Joseph broached a subject he had been considering since Emma's arrival. "Emma, I've been thinking about your education. The schoolmaster in town might be willing to take you on if you're interested in continuing your formal learning." Emma paused in her picking, a handful of green beans still clutched in her fist. "Would I have to stay in town during the week?" "No," Joseph assured her quickly. "It's only a few miles. We could manage the ride each day, at least until the heavy haze come." Emma considered this carefully. She was hungry for learning, missing the lessons her mother had given her, but she was also wary of exposing herself to more people who might question her place in Joseph's life. "What if the other children are like those men? What if they don't want me there because I live with you?" Joseph set down his own basket and gave Emma his full attention. "Some people will always find reasons to judge what they don't understand. But that doesn't mean we should let their ignorance keep us from living our lives." That evening, Joseph presented Emma with something he had been working on in secret, a delicate beadwork bracelet in traditional Apache patterns. The tiny glass beads formed intricate geometric designs in blue, white, and silver, creating a piece of jewelry that was both beautiful and meaningful. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said as he fastened it around Emma's thin wrist. "She gave it to my mother, who gave it to my wife. Now I'm giving it to you." Emma stared at the bracelet in wonder, understanding the significance of receiving something so precious. "But Papa, I'm not really Apache. Are you sure it's okay for me to wear this?" Joseph smiled, touching the bracelet gently with one finger. "Emma, family isn't just about the blood in your veins. It's about the people who choose to love and protect you, and the traditions they choose to share with you. You're my daughter now, which makes you part of my heritage too." Emma threw her arms around Joseph's neck, the bracelet catching the firelight as she hugged him fiercely. "Thank you, Pop. I'll take good care of it, I promise. "I know you will," Joseph replied, holding her close, "just as you'll take good care of the rest of our family's legacy." That night, as Emma lay in bed admiring her bracelet by the glow of the banked fire, she felt a deep sense of belonging that went beyond just having a home. She was part of something larger now, connected to Joseph's ancestors and traditions in a way that made her feel rooted and secure. Joseph sat by the window, keeping watch over their property and thinking about the confrontation earlier that day. He knew it was only the beginning of the opposition they would face. But watching Emma's courage as she defended their family, seeing her pride as she wore his grandmother's bracelet, he felt certain they could weather whatever storms lay ahead. They were creating something new together, a family that bridged cultures and defied conventional expectations. It wouldn't be easy, and it would require constant courage from both of them. But looking at Emma sleeping peacefully with the Apache bracelet on her wrist, Joseph knew they were building something worth fighting for. The traditional beadwork patterns on the bracelet told stories of survival, adaptation, and the enduring strength of family bonds. Now Emma was part of that story, carrying forward the legacy of resilience and love that had sustained Joseph's people through generations of hardship and change. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were simply a father and daughter, bound together by choice and strengthened by the traditions that connected them to something larger than themselves. The knock on the door came 3 days later, more formal and insistent than the casual visit from the ranchers. Emma looked up from her arithmetic lesson at the kitchen table, immediately sensing the change in Joseph's posture as he set down his coffee and moved toward the door. Sheriff Mitchell stood on the porch, his hat in his hands and his expression carefully neutral. Behind him waited Pastor Williams and Mrs. Abernathy, the stern-faced woman who ran the town's unofficial committee for child welfare matters. "Joseph," the sheriff said with the tone of a man performing an unpleasant duty, "I'm afraid we need to discuss the situation with the child." Emma felt her heart begin to race, but she forced herself to remain seated at the table, continuing to work on her sums as if she weren't listening to every word. Joseph had taught her that sometimes the best way to gather information was to appear uninterested. "Her name is Emma," Joseph said firmly, stepping back to allow the visitors inside. "And she's my daughter. What situation do you believe needs discussing?" Mrs. Abernathy pushed forward with the authority of someone accustomed to managing other people's business. "Miss Stonebear, while I'm sure your intentions are good, you must understand that proper arrangements need to be made for this child's welfare. A single man, particularly one of your background, cannot provide the appropriate guidance a young lady requires." Emma's pencil snapped in her grip, but she forced herself to remain still and silent. She could feel the tension radiating from Joseph, though his voice remained calm when he responded. "I'm curious about what you find inappropriate about my care for Emma. She's healthy, well-fed, properly clothed, and receiving an education. What more would you consider necessary?" Pastor Williams cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, but committed to what he saw as his moral duty. "Joseph, it's not about your character as an individual. It's about propriety and what's best for the child's development. She needs female guidance, Christian instruction, and the companionship of other children her age. She attends church when she chooses," Joseph replied. "She receives instruction in both practical skills and academic subjects. And as for female guidance, Mrs. Henderson at the general store has been kind enough to help with some of the questions that are outside my expertise." Sheriff Mitchell held up a hand to forestall Mrs. Abernathy's sharp response. "Joseph, I've received formal complaints about this arrangement. The territorial judge is coming through next month, and there's talk of requesting a formal review of the child's placement." Emma could no longer pretend to ignore the conversation. She stood from her chair, her young face set with determination, and walked to stand beside Joseph. The attack came at dawn, 3 weeks after the sheriff's visit. Emma woke to the sound of angry voices and the thunder of multiple horses in their yard. Through her window she could see at least 6 men dismounting, some carrying torches despite the early morning light. Joseph was already moving, pulling on his boots and reaching for the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. His movements were swift and controlled, the automatic responses of a man trained for combat. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority she had learned to trust completely. "Get dressed quickly and stay inside. No matter what happens, don't come outside unless I call for you." Emma's heart pounded as she pulled on her dress and boots, her fingers fumbling with the buttons in her haste. Through the window she could see the men forming a semicircle in front of the cabin, their faces grim with purpose. The leader, a man Emma recognized as Tom Brennan from the feed store, stepped forward as Joseph emerged onto the porch. Joseph carried his rifle casually, not pointing it at anyone but making its presence unmistakably clear. "Stone Bear," Brennan called out, "we've come to take the girl back to town, where she belongs. You've had your fun playing house, but it's time for this nonsense to end." Joseph's voice carried clearly across the yard, steady and dangerous. "Gentlemen, Emma is my daughter, and this is our home. You're trespassing on private property, and I suggest you leave immediately." Another man, one Emma didn't recognize, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "We ain't leaving without the child. She don't belong with your kind, and we ain't gonna stand by and watch you corrupt an innocent white girl." Emma felt rage boil up in her chest at the man's words. Before she could stop herself, she was opening the cabin door and stepping onto the porch beside Joseph. Despite his earlier instructions, "I'm not innocent," she announced, her young voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "I'm educated, and I'm not going anywhere with you." The men shifted uncomfortably at being confronted by the child they claimed to be protecting. Brennan tried to adopt a gentler tone, though his eyes remained hard. "Now, Emma, you don't understand what's happening here. We're trying to help you. You need to be with proper folks who can raise you right." Emma stepped closer to Joseph, feeling his solid presence beside her like an anchor. "These are proper folks," she said firmly. "This is my father, and this is my home. You're the ones who don't belong here." Joseph's hand found her shoulder, a warning to be careful, but also a gesture of support for her courage. "Emma," the unknown man said with poorly concealed anger, "you're coming with us, whether you want to or not. A child don't get to make these kinds of decisions. Actually, she does." The voice came from behind the group of men, and Emma felt relief flood through her as she recognized David Morrison, the territorial judge who had arrived in town earlier than expected. Judge Morrison dismounted from his horse, with the dignity of a man accustomed to command. He was younger than Emma had expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. "Judge Morrison," Brennan said, clearly flustered by the unexpected arrival, "we were ladies. We came to retrieve this child from an inappropriate situation." "What I see," the judge replied calmly, "is a group of armed men threatening a family on their own property. Mr. Stone Bear, I presume you are Joseph Stone Bear, and this young lady is Emma." Joseph inclined his head respectfully. "Your Honor, yes, sir, this is my daughter Emma, and these men are attempting to remove her from our home without legal authority." Judge Morrison studied the scene before him with the careful attention of a man who understood that his decisions carried life-changing consequences. Emma could see him taking in her clean appearance, her confident posture beside Joseph, and the obvious bond between them. "Emma," the judge said gently, "would you be willing to speak with me privately about your situation here?" Emma glanced up at Joseph, who nodded encouragingly, despite his obvious concern. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd like that very much." Judge Morrison gestured toward a large oak tree at the edge of the clearing, away from both the hostile men and Joseph's protective presence. As they walked together, Emma could feel every eye upon her, understanding that her words in the next few minutes might determine the entire course of her future. "Emma," the judge began once they were seated on a fallen log beneath the tree, "I need you to tell me honestly about your life here. Are you happy? Do you feel safe? Is Mr. Stone Bear treating you well? Emma looked directly into the judge's eyes, drawing on every lesson Joseph had taught her about speaking truth with courage and clarity. Your Honor, before I came here, I spent 3 months knocking on doors, begging for work, sleeping in barns and eating scraps when I could find them. Everyone I asked for help told me they had no room for another mouth to feed. Papa was the first person who looked at me and saw someone worth caring about. Judge Morrison nodded encouragingly. Tell me about your daily life here. What does Mr. Stone Bear expect of you? He expects me to learn, Emma replied promptly. He teaches me practical skills like woodworking and tracking, but he also makes sure I keep up with my reading and arithmetic. He tells me stories about his people's history and traditions. Most importantly, he expects me to think for myself and speak up for what I believe is right. And what do you believe is right, Emma? Emma took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would define everything that mattered to her. I believe that family isn't about having the same color skin or coming from the same place. I believe it's about people who choose to love and protect each other. Papa chose me when no one else would, and I choose him back. We're a real family, even if we don't look like what some people expect. Judge Morrison was quiet for several minutes, studying Emma's earnest face and weighing her words against the competing claims he had heard. Finally, he stood and gestured for her to follow him back to where the others waited. Gentlemen, he announced to the assembled group, I've heard enough to make my preliminary assessment. This child is clearly well cared for, properly educated, and genuinely happy in her current placement. I see no grounds for removing her from Mr. Stone Bear's custody. Brennan's face flushed with anger. Judge, you can't seriously be considering leaving a white child with Apache. It ain't natural, and it ain't right. Judge Morrison's voice grew cold. Miss Brennan, what I consider natural and right is a child being loved and protected by someone who has proven himself capable of providing excellent care. What I find unnatural is a group of armed men attempting to terrorize a family on their own property. He turned to address the full group with the authority of his office. Gentlemen, you will disperse immediately and refrain from any further harassment of this family. If I hear of any additional incidents, I will consider them contempt of court and act accordingly. As the men reluctantly mounted their horses and rode away, muttering among themselves about inappropriate judicial decisions, Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. Joseph immediately moved to her side, his strong arm supporting her as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. You were very brave, daughter, he said quietly. I'm proud of how you spoke up for our family. Judge Morrison approached them with a more relaxed expression, now that the hostile crowd had departed. Mr. Stone Bear, I'd like to discuss formalizing this custody arrangement. Emma has made it quite clear where she belongs, and I'm inclined to support her choice. That evening, as they sat by the fire processing the events of the day, Emma pulled Joseph's ancestral tomahawk from its place on the mantelpiece. The weapon was beautiful and deadly, its blade gleaming in the firelight, its handle worn smooth by generations of Stone Bear hands. Papa, she said thoughtfully, when those men came here today, I could see in your eyes that you were ready to fight them to protect me. Joseph nodded gravely. I would have done whatever was necessary to keep you safe, Emma. A father protects his family. Emma traced the carved patterns on the tomahawk's handle with one finger. And I was ready to fight them too. I guess that makes me a real Stone Bear. Joseph smiled, taking the weapon from her hands and returning it to its honored place above the fireplace. Yes, daughter, that makes you a real Stone Bear indeed. As they prepared for bed that night, both of them felt the deep satisfaction of having faced a serious threat and emerged victorious. Their bond had been tested by hostile forces and legal scrutiny, and it had proven strong enough to withstand both challenges. Tomorrow would bring new steps toward formalizing their family legally, but tonight they were simply a father and daughter who had defended their home together and won the right to continue building their life as they chose. They had proven that love and courage could overcome prejudice and fear, that family bonds forged by choice could be stronger than those created by blood alone. The tomahawk above the fireplace gleamed in the dying light, a symbol of the warrior heritage that now flowed through their family, binding them together with traditions of courage, honor, and fierce protection of those they loved. I am not for what I can do for them. I'm not going to let anyone take that away without a fight. Joseph felt his heart swell with pride and determination. This child, this brave, fierce little girl, had chosen him as definitively as he had chosen her. Whatever legal battles lay ahead, they would face them as a united family. That evening, as they sat by the fire working on their respective carving projects, Emma broached a subject that had been troubling her since the sheriff's visit. "Papa, what did Mrs. Abernathy mean when she said you were of your background? Why does it matter that you're Apache?" Joseph set down his knife and considered how to explain the complexities of prejudice to a child who had never had to think about such things. "Emma, some people believe that the color of your skin or your heritage determines what kind of person you are. They think that because I'm Apache, I must be dangerous or uncivilized or unfit to raise a white child." Emma frowned, processing this information. "But that's stupid. You're the kindest, most honorable person I've ever known." "Thank you, daughter, but not everyone will see me the way you do. Some people fear what they don't understand, and they use that fear to justify treating others poorly." Emma was quiet for several minutes, her young mind working through the implications of what Joseph had told her. Finally, she looked up at him with solemn eye. "Then we'll have to show them they're wrong, won't we? We'll have to prove that family is about love, not about having the same color skin." Joseph smiled, marveling once again at this child's wisdom and courage. "Yes, Emma, that's exactly what we'll have to do." As they prepared for bed that night, Emma carefully placed the sheriff's badge she had drawn in her arithmetic notebook, a reminder of the authority that threatened their family, next to her wooden horse on the mantelpiece. It was a symbol of the challenges they faced, but also of her determination to meet those challenges head-on. "Papa?" she called softly from her bed. "Yes, daughter. When the judge comes, I want to speak for myself. I want to tell him why I belong here with you." Joseph felt a mixture of pride and trepidation. "Emma, that might not be easy. The judge might ask you difficult questions." "I'm not afraid," Emma replied with quiet conviction. "I know who I am now, and I know where I belong. That's all the truth I need." As Joseph settled into his own bed, he reflected on the remarkable transformation he had witnessed in Emma over the past few weeks. She had arrived at his door as a desperate, frightened child seeking work. Now she was becoming a confident young woman who understood her own worth and was willing to fight for her right to choose her own family. The legal battle ahead would test them both, but Joseph felt certain that their bond was strong enough to survive whatever challenges the court might present. They had built something real and valuable together, something that transcended the narrow prejudices of those who couldn't understand love that crossed cultural boundaries. Outside, the wind carried the scent of approaching autumn, a reminder that winter was coming, and with it the isolation that would test their resilience as a family. But inside the warm cabin, surrounded by the evidence of their growing life together, Emma and Joseph felt ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. They were no longer two lonely individuals who had found temporary comfort in each other's company. They had become a family, bound by choice and strengthened by adversity, prepared to defend their right to love and protect each other against any force that might try to separate them. The attack came at dawn, 3 weeks after the sheriff's visit. Emma woke to the sound of angry voices and the thunder of multiple horses in their yard. Through her window, she could see at least 6 men dismounting, some carrying torches despite the early morning light. Joseph was already moving, pulling on his boots and reaching for the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace. His movements were swift and controlled, the automatic responses of a man trained for combat. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority she had learned to trust completely. Get dressed quickly and stay inside. No matter what happens, don't come outside unless I call for you." Emma's heart pounded as she pulled on her dress and boots, her fingers fumbling with the buttons in her haste. Through the window she could see the men forming a semicircle in front of the cabin, their faces grim with purpose. The leader, a man Emma recognized as Tom Brennan from the feed store, stepped forward as Joseph emerged onto the porch. Joseph carried his rifle casually, not pointing it at anyone but making its presence unmistakably clear. "Stone Bear," Brennan called out. "We've come to take the girl back to town where she belongs. You've had your fun playing house, but it's time for this nonsense to end." Joseph's voice carried clearly across the yard, steady and dangerous. "Gentlemen, Emma is my daughter, and this is our home. You're trespassing on private property, and I suggest you leave immediately." Another man, one Emma didn't recognize, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "We ain't leaving without the child. She don't belong with your kind, and we ain't gonna stand by and watch you corrupt an innocent white girl." Emma felt rage boil up in her chest at the man's words. Before she could stop herself, she was opening the cabin door and stepping onto the porch beside Joseph, despite his earlier instructions. "I'm not innocent," she announced, her young voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "I'm educated, and I'm not going anywhere with you." The men shifted uncomfortably at being confronted by the child they claimed to be protecting. Brennan tried to adopt a gentler tone, though his eyes remained hard. "Now, Emma, you don't understand what's happening here. We're trying to help you. You need to be with proper folks who can raise you right." Emma stepped closer to Joseph, feeling his solid presence beside her like an anchor. "These are proper folks," she said firmly. "This is my father, and this is my home. You're the ones who don't belong here." Joseph's hand found her shoulder, a warning to be careful, but also a gesture of support for her courage. "Emma," the unknown man said with poorly concealed anger, "you're coming with us whether you want to or not. A child don't get to make these kinds of decisions." "Actually, she does." The voice came from behind the group of men, and Emma felt relief flood through her as she recognized David Morrison, the territorial judge who had arrived in town earlier than expected. Judge Morrison dismounted from his horse with the dignity of a man accustomed to command. He was younger than Emma had expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. "Judge Morrison," Brennan said, clearly flustered by the unexpected arrival, that is, we came to retrieve this child from an inappropriate situation." "What I see," the judge replied calmly, "is a group of armed men threatening a family on their own property. Mr. Stone Bear, I presume you are Joseph Stone Bear, and this young lady is Emma." Joseph inclined his head respectfully. "Your Honor?" "Yes, sir. This is my daughter Emma, and these men are attempting to remove her from our home without legal authority." Judge Morrison studied the scene before him with the careful attention of a man who understood that his decisions carried life-changing consequences. Emma could see him taking in her clean appearance, her confident posture beside Joseph, and the obvious bond between them. "Emma," the judge said gently, "would you be willing to speak with me privately about your situation here?" Emma glanced up at Joseph, who nodded encouragingly despite his obvious concern. "Yes, Your Honor, I'd like that very much." Judge Morrison gestured toward a large oak tree at the edge of the clearing, away from both the hostile men and Joseph's protective presence. As they walked together, Emma could feel every eye upon her, understanding that her words in the next few minutes might determine the entire course of her future. "Emma," the judge began once they were seated on a fallen log beneath the tree, "I need you to tell me honestly about your life here. Are you happy? Do you feel safe? Is Mr. Stone Bear treating you well?" Emma looked directly into the judge's eyes, drawing on every lesson Joseph had taught her about speaking truth with courage and clarity. "Your Honor, before I came here, I spent 3 months knocking on doors, begging for work, sleeping in barns and eating scraps when I could find them. Everyone I asked for help told me they had no room for another mouth to feed. Papa was the first person who looked at me and saw someone worth caring about. Judge Morrison nodded encouragingly. Tell me about your daily life here. What does Mr. Stonebear expect of you? He expects me to learn, Emma replied promptly. He teaches me practical skills like woodworking and tracking, but he also makes sure I keep up with my reading and arithmetic. He tells me stories about his people's history and traditions. Most importantly, he expects me to think for myself and speak up for what I believe is right. And what do you believe is right, Emma? Emma took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would define everything that mattered to her. I believe that family isn't about having the same color skin or coming from the same place. I believe it's about people who choose to love and protect each other. Papa chose me when no one else would, and I choose him back. We're a real family, even if we don't look like what some people expect. Judge Morrison was quiet for several minutes, studying Emma's earnest face and weighing her words against the competing claims he had heard. Finally, he stood and gestured for her to follow him back to where the others waited. Gentlemen, he announced to the assembled group, I've heard enough to make my preliminary assessment. This child is clearly well cared for, properly educated, and genuinely happy in her current placement. I see no grounds for removing her from Mr. Stonebear's custody. Brennan's face flushed with anger. Judge, you can't seriously be considering leaving a white child with an Apache. It ain't natural, and it ain't right. Judge Morrison's voice grew cold. Miss Brennan, what I consider natural and right is a child being loved and protected by someone who has proven himself capable of providing excellent care. What I find unnatural is a group of armed men attempting to terrorize a family on their own property. He turned to address the full group with the authority of his office. Gentlemen, you will disperse immediately and refrain from any further harassment of this family. If I hear of any additional incidents, I will consider them contempt of court and act accordingly. As the men reluctantly mounted their horses and rode away, muttering among themselves about inappropriate judicial decisions, Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. Joseph immediately moved to her side, his strong arm supporting her as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. You were very brave, daughter, he said quietly. I'm proud of how you spoke up for our family. Judge Morrison approached them with a more relaxed expression, now that the hostile crowd had departed. Mr. Stonebear, I'd like to discuss formalizing this custody arrangement. Emma has made it quite clear where she belongs, and I'm inclined to support her choice. That evening, as they sat by the fire processing the events of the day, Emma pulled Joseph's ancestral tomahawk from its place on the mantelpiece. The weapon was beautiful and deadly, its blade gleaming in the firelight, its handle worn smooth by generations of Stonebear hands. Papa, she said thoughtfully, when those men came here today, I could see in your eyes that you were ready to fight them to protect me. Joseph nodded gravely. I would have done whatever was necessary to keep you safe, Emma. A father protects his family. Emma traced the carved patterns on the tomahawk's handle with one finger. And I was ready to fight them too. I guess that makes me a real Stonebear. Joseph smiled, taking the weapon from her hands and returning it to its honored place above the fireplace. Yes, daughter, that makes you a real Stonebear indeed. As they prepared for bed that night, both of them felt the deep satisfaction of having faced a serious threat and emerged victorious. Their bond had been tested by hostile forces and legal scrutiny, and it had proven strong enough to withstand both challenges. Tomorrow would bring new steps toward formalizing their family legally, but tonight they were simply a father and daughter who had defended their home together and won the right to continue building their life as they chose. They had proven that love and courage could overcome prejudice and fear, that family bonds forged by choice could be stronger than those created by blood alone. The tomahawk above the fireplace gleamed in the dying light, a symbol of the warrior heritage that now flowed through their family, binding them together with traditions of courage, honor, and fierce protection of those they love. Chapter 6 complete. Word count, 900 words. This chapter features the climactic confrontation, where hostile townspeople attempt to forcibly remove Emma, only to be stopped by the early arrival of Judge Morris. Emma's courage in defending her choice and Joseph's readiness to protect her demonstrate the strength of their bond, while Joseph's ancestral tomahawk symbolizes the warrior heritage and protective instincts that now define their family. Chapter 7. Winter's Lesson. The first heavy snow came in late November, blanketing Joseph and Emma's homestead in a pristine white silence that seemed to muffle the rest of the world. For Emma, it was her first winter in the mountains, and she marveled at how completely the landscape transformed overnight from familiar browns and greens to an alien wonderland of sculpted drifts and ice crystal trees. Joseph watched her wonder with amusement as she pressed her face to the cabin window each morning, cataloguing the changes that each new snowfall brought to their surroundings. "Papa," she said one morning as they prepared breakfast together, "how do we know what's under all that snow? How do we find our way if everything looks the same?" Joseph smiled, recognizing a teaching moment. "Come," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Let me show you how the Apache rid winter." They spent the morning walking the familiar paths around their property, Joseph pointing out the subtle signs that remained visible even under heavy snow cover. The way certain rocks created wind shadows that revealed the direction of prevailing storms. How animal tracks told stories about who was still active and where they sought shelter. The patterns in snow drift that indicated underground water sources or the presence of fallen logs. The land doesn't disappear in winter, Joseph explained as they examined a set of rabbit tracks near the creek. It just wears a different face. If you know how to look, you can read everything you need to know. Emma absorbed these lessons with the same intense concentration she brought to her arithmetic problems, understanding that this knowledge might someday mean the difference between life and death in this harsh environment. Back in the cabin, warm and dry by the fire, they settled into the rhythm that would sustain them through the long months of isolation. Joseph had spent the autumn months preparing carefully. The root cellar was stocked with preserved vegetables and meat. The woodshed was filled with seasoned timber, and the barn held enough hay to keep their animals fed until spring. But more importantly, he had prepared a different kind of sustenance for the long evenings they would spend together. From beneath his bed, he pulled out a wooden trunk Emma had never seen before. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said, opening the lid to reveal treasures wrapped in soft deer hide. "She told me that winter evenings are for passing on the stories that keep a people alive." Inside the trunk, Emma found wonders that took her breath away: intricately beaded clothing, carved bone ornaments, painted hide scrolls covered with symbols she didn't recognize, and bundles of sage and sweetgrass that filled the cabin with their sacred scent. "These are the winter stories of my people," Joseph explained, lifting out a painted hide that depicted warriors and buffalo, storms and ceremonies. "My grandmother taught them to me during the winters of my childhood, just as her grandmother had taught them to her." That night, as wind howled around the cabin and snow piled against the windows, Joseph began Emma's education in Apache history and culture. He told her about Changing Woman, who created the seasons and taught the people how to live in harmony with the natural world. He shared stories of Coyote, the trickster whose adventures taught important lessons about wisdom and foolishness. He explained the sacred directions and the spirits that dwelt in the mountains, rivers, and desert places of his homeland. Emma listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions and requesting that certain stories be repeated so she could remember them perfectly. Joseph was amazed by her hunger for these tales, her intuitive understanding of their deeper meanings. "Papa," she said one evening as he finished a story about the warrior who learned that true strength came from protecting others rather than defeating enemies, Are these my stories now too? Joseph looked at this serious, eager child who had somehow become the most important person in his world. Yes, Emma, these are your stories now. You are Stone Bear, and these stories belong to all Stone Bears. As the weeks passed, their evening storytelling sessions became the cornerstone of their winter routine. Emma began to memorize the tales, practicing their cadences, and asking Joseph to correct her when she missed important details. She learned to identify the patterns in the beadwork on her grandmother's dress, understanding that each color and design carried specific meanings. But the winter brought challenges as well as wonder. In January, Emma began having nightmares again. The trauma of her mother's death and her months of desperation resurfacing in the enforced quietness of their isolation. She would wake screaming, reliving the fear and helplessness of finding herself completely alone in the world. Joseph would sit beside her bed on those nights, his presence a steady anchor against the terrors that pursued her through sleep. He taught her Apache prayers for protection and healing, showing her how to burn sage and offer thanks to the spirits for their continued safety. The nightmares will pass, he assured her during one particularly difficult night. Your heart is healing from old wounds, and sometimes healing hurts before it helps. Emma clung to his hand in the darkness. What if I forget her, Papa? What if I forget my real mother because I'm learning to be Apache? Joseph's voice was gentle but firm. Emma, loving me and my traditions doesn't diminish your love for your mother. She will always be part of who you are, just as my grandmother is part of who I am. We carry our loved ones with us always. He reached into the trunk and pulled out a soft piece of buckskin, showing Emma how to paint her own memory pictures using traditional pigments. Together they created a hide painting that told the story of her mother. A woman with yellow hair, teaching a small girl to read, baking pies in a sunny kitchen, singing lullabies by lamplight. Now she's part of our family stories too, Joseph said, as they hung the painting beside the others. Your children will know about the woman who gave you life and taught you kindness. One February morning, Emma woke to find Joseph sitting by the window with a concerned expression. During the night, one of their horses had broken through the fence and wandered off into the forest. In the deep snow and sub-zero temperatures, the animal could freeze to death if not found quickly. I have to go after her, Joseph said, already preparing his tracking gear. But I can't leave you alone, and it's too dangerous for you to come with me in this weather. Emma squared her shoulders with determination. Papa, you taught me that being family means taking care of each other. If I stay here and keep the fire going and watch for your return, that's how I can help. Joseph hesitated, torn between his protective instincts and his recognition that Emma had grown tremendously over their months together. Finally, he knelt down and placed his hands on her shoulders. All right, daughter, but you must promise me that you'll stay inside, keep the fire burning, and if I'm not back by sunset, you'll follow the emergency plan we practiced. Emma nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation. I promise, Papa. I'll take care of our home until you come back. Joseph spent the day tracking through the forest, following signs that were nearly invisible in the blowing snow. He found the horse finally trapped in a ravine but alive, and managed to lead her home as darkness was falling. When he opened the cabin door, he found Emma tending a bright fire, hot soup waiting on the stove, and their animals already fed and watered for the night. She had spent the day proving to herself and to him that she could shoulder real responsibility when needed. Welcome home, Papa, she said, helping him out of his snow-covered coat. I kept everything safe while you were gone. Joseph hugged her tightly, filled with pride at her competence and maturity. You did perfectly, daughter. You're becoming quite the mountain woman. That night, Emma asked Joseph to tell her the story of the grandmother's quilt again, the tale of how Apache women passed down wisdom through the beautiful things they created with their hands. As she drifted off to sleep, Emma dreamed not of loss and fear, but of the spring that would come and the new stories they would create together. Joseph sat by the fire long after Emma fell asleep, working on a special project he had been crafting throughout the winter. In his hands, a delicate wooden music box took shape, its interior designed to hold Emma's most precious, small treasures. When wound, it would play a simple melody he had carved into its mechanical heart, a lullaby his grandmother had sung to him, now passed down to another generation. Outside, the wind continued to howl through the mountains, but inside their warm cabin, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of their shared life, Joseph felt the deep satisfaction of time well spent. Winter had tested them both and found them strong. When spring arrived, they would emerge from their cocoon of stories and tradition as an even more tightly bonded family, ready to face whatever challenges the outside world might present. Spring arrived with a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers, transforming the mountain landscape from stark white to vibrant green almost overnight. Emma celebrated her 11th birthday in May with a quiet celebration that felt more meaningful than any party she had ever imagined. Joseph had carved her a beautiful jewelry box, and together they had baked a cake using honey from wild bees and berries they had preserved from the previous summer. But their peaceful routine was shattered on a warm June morning when a stranger rode up to their cabin, dusty from hard travel, and carrying news that would change everything. Emma thought she knew about herself. The man introduced himself as Marshal Tom Bradley, a territorial law enforcement officer with weathered features and kind eyes that seemed familiar to Emma, though she was certain they had never met. He accepted Joseph's offer of coffee and a meal, but his manner suggested this was more than a social visit. "Mr. Stone Bear," he began carefully, "I'm here about Emma Matthews. I've been tracking down information about her family background, and I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share." Emma felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Just when she had begun to feel truly secure in her life with Joseph, the past was returning to complicate their happiness. Marshal Bradley pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, the worn edges suggesting it had been carried for some time. Emma recognized it immediately as a wanted poster, and her heart began to race as she saw the face printed there. The man in the drawing looked like her. The same green eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same unruly blonde hair, but the text below the picture made her blood run cold. "Wanted for armed robbery and murder, William Wild Bill Matthews. Reward $500 dead or alive." Emma stared at the poster in shock, unable to process what she was seeing. The man depicted was clearly her father, but this violent criminal bore no resemblance to the gentle, hard-working miner her mother had described in stories. "This can't be right," she whispered. "My father died in a mining accident. He was a good man." Marshal Bradley's expression was compassionate, but firm. "Emma, I'm sorry, but William Matthews was killed 3 years ago during a shootout with law enforcement in Colorado Territory. He was the leader of a gang that robbed banks and stagecoaches throughout the mountain territories." Joseph moved protectively closer to Emma, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. "Marshal, why are you bringing this information to us now? Emma's father is dead, regardless of how he died. What does this have to do with her current situation?" "Because," Marshal Bradley replied, "there are legal complications that affect Emma's status. William Matthews died with outstanding warrants and unpaid debts. Some of his victims' families have been seeking compensation, and they've discovered that he had a daughter." Emma felt the world spinning around her as the implications sank in. "They want money from me? For things my father did?" "Not exactly," the marshal clarified. "But there are questions about whether assets belonging to your family, including any property or money your mother might have left you, could be subject to claims against your father's estate." Joseph's voice grew dangerously quiet. "Marshal, Emma is a child who has been through more trauma than any person should have to endure. She's built a new life here, and she's legally my daughter now. What exactly are you suggesting?" Marshal Bradley held up a hand in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble for your family, Mr. Stone Bear. In fact, I'm here to help. You see, William Matthews was my brother. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. She stared at the marshal with new understanding, seeing now why his features had seemed familiar. The same green eyes, the same strong jawline, but where her father's face had been marked by violence and desperation, Marshal Bradley's showed character and integrity. "Your brother?" Emma whispered. "Your uncle," he confirmed gently. "I've been searching for you since I learned of your mother's death, not to claim you or disrupt your life, but to make sure you were safe and to offer what help I could." Joseph studied the man carefully, his protective instincts warring with his recognition that this news might actually benefit Emma in the long run. "What kind of help?" Joseph asked cautiously. Marshal Bradley reached into his jacket again, this time producing a legal document. "I've been working with territorial authorities to clear up the legal complications surrounding your father's crimes. As his only surviving relative and a law enforcement officer, I have some influence in these matters." Emma found her voice again, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Are you here to take me away?" "No, child," Marshal Bradley said firmly. "I can see that you found a good home here, and I have no intention of disrupting that. But I wanted you to know that you have family blood relatives who care about your welfare, and I wanted to make sure that your father's mistakes don't continue to haunt your future." Over the next several hours, Marshal Bradley explained the complex legal situation Emma had unknowingly inherited. Her father's crimes had indeed created potential claims against any property he might have owned. But her uncle's investigation had revealed that William Matthews had actually stolen very little money and owned no significant assets at the time of his death. More importantly, Marshal Bradley had used his influence to ensure that Emma could not be held responsible for her father's debts or crimes. He had also brought something else, letters from Sarah Matthews that had been found among William's effects after his death. "Your mother wrote these to your father after their separation," he explained, handling the bundle of letters with careful reverence. "She never knew what he had become, and her letters show that she tried to maintain their marriage and family even when he disappeared for long periods." Emma read the letters with tears streaming down her face, seeing in her mother's words the evidence of a woman trying desperately to hold her family together while protecting her daughter from the truth about her father's activities. Sarah Matthews had died, believing that her husband was a flawed but essentially good man who had died in an accident, never knowing that he had become a violent criminal. "She loved him," Emma said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "Even when he was gone, even when she had to raise me alone, she still loved him." "Yes," Marshal Bradley confirmed, "and she loved you enough to create a different story about your father, one that wouldn't burden you with shame you didn't deserve." Joseph had remained quiet during most of this conversation, but now he spoke with the wisdom Emma had learned to trust completely. "Emma, learning the truth about your father doesn't change who you are. You are not responsible for his choices, just as you are not diminished by his failures. You are Emma Stone Bear, my daughter, and you carry the best of both your mother's love and your father's courage, without the weakness that led him astray." Emma looked between Joseph and Marshal Bradley, processing the strange turn her life had taken. She had gained an uncle she never knew existed, learned terrible truths about her father, and discovered new depths of her mother's strength and sacrifice. "Uncle Tom," she said, testing the words carefully, "I'm glad you found me, but I want you to understand that Joseph is my father now. This is my home, and these are my people." Marshal Bradley smiled, and Emma could see genuine affection in his expression. "I understand completely, Emma. I'm not here to compete with the family you've chosen. I'm here to support it, and to make sure that your father's mistakes never threaten your happiness again." That evening, as Marshal Bradley prepared to leave the next morning, Emma sat by the fire, working on a new beadwork project while Joseph carved nearby. The routine activities helped ground her after the emotional upheaval of the day. "Papa," she said quietly, "I'm glad I know the truth now. It means I can stop wondering about things I half remembered and start building my future on solid ground." Joseph nodded approvingly. "The truth, even when it's painful, is always better than living with lies or uncertainty." Now you know who you really are, not just the daughter of William Matthews, but also the niece of Tom Bradley and the child of Sarah Matthews' love. Most importantly, you're Emma Stone Bear, and that identity is yours to define. As she worked the tiny beads into intricate patterns, Emma reflected on the strange way her family kept expanding to include people she had never expected. First Joseph, who had chosen her as his daughter. Now Uncle Tom, who had searched for her out of family obligation, but had chosen to support her happiness rather than disrupt it. The wanted poster lay on the table beside her, but it no longer seemed like a source of shame. Instead, it was a reminder that people could change, that children were not doomed to repeat their parents' mistakes, and that the choices she made from this moment forward would define her legacy far more than the circumstances of her birth. Looking around the cabin that had become her sanctuary, surrounded by the evidence of the life she and Joseph had built together, Emma felt a deep sense of peace about her complicated heritage. She was the daughter of a good woman who had loved unwisely, the niece of a good man who served justice, and the chosen child of a warrior who had taught her that family was about honor and protection, rather than blood and obligation. Tomorrow, Uncle Tom would ride away, but he would leave behind the knowledge that Emma had family connections beyond the mountain cabin, people who cared about her welfare and would support her choices from a distance. It was a kind of security she had never had before, the assurance that she was not completely alone in the world, even if something happened to Joseph. But more than that, the day's revelations had strengthened her understanding of who she was choosing to become. She was Emma Stone Bear, and no shadow from her father's past could diminish the brightness of the future she was building with her chosen family. August brought with it a decision that would test Emma's resilience in an entirely new way. Judge Morrison visited their homestead with news that would reshape her daily routine. The territorial government had established a new school in the settlement, and Emma's formal education needed to resume. "The arrangement you've created here is admirable," the judge told Joseph, as they sat on the cabin's front porch, watching Emma practice her tracking skills in the meadow beyond. "But Emma's intellectual abilities are exceptional, and she deserves opportunities that extend beyond what even the most dedicated parent can provide." Joseph had been expecting this conversation ever since their legal victory in the spring. Emma's quick mind and hunger for learning were obvious to anyone who spent time with her, and he had always known that his rustic education, however loving, could not substitute forever for formal schooling. "The question," Judge Morrison continued, "is whether Emma is ready to navigate the social challenges that attending school will present. There will be children and parents who question her place in your family." Emma approached them as they talked, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand what was being discussed. Her face showed determination mixed with apprehension. "Your Honor," she said with the directness that had become her trademark, "I'd like very much to continue my education, but I won't pretend to be anyone other than Emma Stone Bear. If people have problems with my family, they'll have to work through those problems themselves." Judge Morrison smiled at her forthright response. "Emma, I think you'll find that courage and intelligence have a way of earning respect, even from those who begin with prejudices." The following Monday morning found Emma riding into town beside Joseph, her school supplies packed in a leather satchel he had crafted for her, and her hair braided with a single eagle feather that marked her Apache heritage. She had dressed carefully in her best dress, but she also wore the beadwork bracelet that proclaimed her identity as a stone bear. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden building that served children ranging in age from 6 to 16. Emma's stomach fluttered with nervousness as she approached the front steps, but Joseph's steady presence beside her provided the courage she needed. Mrs. Henderson, the schoolmistress, greeted them with professional courtesy that masked whatever personal reservations she might have harbored. She was a middle-aged woman from Boston who had come west seeking adventure and found instead the challenge of educating frontier children with widely varying backgrounds and abilities. "Emma," she said kindly, "I've heard quite a lot about your academic progress from Judge Morris. Why don't you take a seat, and we'll see where you fit best with our current lessons." The other students watched Emma's entrance with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Some recognized her from previous encounters in town, while others had only heard the whispered stories about the white girl who lived with the Apache man. Emma chose a seat in the middle of the room, neither hiding in the back nor calling attention to herself in the front. The morning lessons revealed immediately that Emma's education with Joseph had been more comprehensive than anyone had expected. When Mrs. Henderson tested her arithmetic skills, Emma solved problems that challenged even the older student. Her reading level was years ahead of her age group, and her penmanship, learned during long winter evenings by firelight, was precise and elegant. But it was during the geography lesson that Emma truly distinguished herself. When Miss Henderson asked the class to identify mountain ranges on a map of the Western Territories, Emma not only named them correctly, but added details about the tribes that lived in each region, the seasonal migration patterns of game animals, and the traditional uses of native plants found in different elevations. "How do you know all of this?" asked Timothy Brennan, the son of the man who had led the group that tried to remove Emma from Joseph's home months earlier. Emma looked directly at Timothy, her green eyes steady and unafraid. "My father taught me. He knows the land better than anyone, because he learned from people who have lived here for generations." A younger girl named Mary whispered something to her desk partner about savage knowledge, but Emma pretended not to hear. Miss Henderson, however, did hear, and her sharp look silenced the whispered commentary. "Emma's knowledge is quite impressive," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "I think we could all benefit from learning more about the geography and natural history of our own region." During the lunch break, most of the children clustered in small groups, leaving Emma to eat alone under a large cottonwood tree. She had packed jerky and cornbread, along with wild berries she and Joseph had gathered that morning. As she ate, she watched the other children's games and conversations, noting the social hierarchies and alliances that governed their interactions. She was surprised when a boy about her own age approached her cautiously. He was smaller than most of the other 11-year-olds, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded her somewhat of Joseph. "I'm Danny O'Sullivan," he said shyly. "My ma said I should stay away from you, but I wanted to tell you that what you said about the mountains was really interesting." Emma smiled, recognizing a kindred spirit. "Thank you, Danny. Would you like to sit with me?" Danny glanced nervously toward the other children, then sat down beside Emma with the air of someone making a conscious choice to defy expectations. "Why did your ma say to stay away from me?" Emma asked with genuine curiosity rather than hurt feelings. Danny looked uncomfortable, but answered honestly. "She says your pa is dangerous, and that you might be too. But you don't seem dangerous to me. You seem smart." "My papa is dangerous to people who threaten our family," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "But he's gentle with people who treat us with respect. I suppose I'm the same way." Their conversation was interrupted by Timothy Brennan and two of his friends, who approached with the swagger of boys testing their courage. "Danny," Timothy said with authority, "you shouldn't be talking to her. She's not one of us." Emma stood up slowly, brushing crumbs from her dress. She was nearly as tall as Timothy, despite being younger, and her months of mountain living had given her a wiry strength that was evident in her posture. "You're right, Timothy," she said calmly. "I'm not one of you. I'm someone who's learned that worth comes from character, not from the circumstances of your birth. I'm someone who's been taught that courage means protecting people who can't protect themselves, not bullying them to make yourself feel important." Timothy's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Mrs. Henderson's bell rang to call them back to afternoon lessons. The confrontation established Emma's position in the school's social hierarchy. She would not be easily intimidated, but neither would she be readily accepted. Over the following weeks, she found herself occupying a unique space, respected for her intelligence and courage, but isolated by the circumstances that made her different from her classmates. Danny O'Sullivan became her first real friend, drawn by their shared love of learning and their common experience of being outsiders. Danny's family were Irish immigrants, who faced their own prejudices from some community members, and he understood what it felt like to be judged by circumstances beyond his control. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an unexpected ally as well. The school mistress had been educated at a women's college in Massachusetts, and she recognized exceptional ability regardless of its source. She began providing Emma with advanced books and special assignments that challenged her intellect and encouraged her academic growth. "Emma," she said one afternoon as the other students filed out, "I've been corresponding with a colleague who teaches at a girls' academy in Denver. Your abilities are quite remarkable, and there may be opportunities for advanced education that you should consider as you get older." Emma felt a flutter of excitement mixed with uncertainty. "Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I'm not sure I could ever leave my family or this place. It's taken me so long to find where I belong." Mrs. Henderson smiled with understanding. "Emma, getting an education doesn't mean abandoning your family or your heritage. It means expanding your ability to contribute to the world and to carry your family's values into whatever field you choose to pursue." That evening, Emma shared her day's experiences with Joseph as they worked together in his workshop. She had begun learning to carve more complex patterns, and her current project was a wooden box decorated with both Apache geometric designs and Irish Celtic knots, a tribute to her friendship with Danny. "Papa," she said as she worked, "Miss Henderson thinks I might be able to attend a real academy someday, maybe even go to college like she did." Joseph paused in his own carving, studying Emma's serious face. "What do you think about that possibility?" "I think I'd like to learn as much as I can," Emma replied honestly. "But I also think that knowledge is only valuable if you use it to help other people. Maybe I could become a teacher and come back here to help children like Danny and me, children who are different but deserve the same chances as everyone else." Joseph felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's wisdom and compassion. "Emma, whatever path you choose for your education, you'll always have my support. But more importantly, you'll always have a home here to return to." That night, as Emma worked on her school assignments by lamplight, she felt the deep satisfaction of intellectual challenge, combined with the security of belonging. The primer book on her table represented more than just academic learning. It symbolized her growing ability to navigate multiple worlds and to build bridges between different communities. She was becoming someone who could speak the language of formal education, while honoring the traditional knowledge Joseph had shared with her. She could stand up to bullies like Timothy Brennan while extending friendship to isolated children like Danny O'Sullivan. Most importantly, she was learning that her unique background wasn't a burden to overcome, but a strength that allowed her to see connections and possibilities that others might miss. As autumn approached and her confidence in the school environment grew, Emma began to understand that her education was about more than acquiring knowledge for its own sake. She was preparing herself to become a bridge between worlds, someone who could honor both her Apache heritage and her Irish friendship, both her mountain home and her academic ambitions. The school primer that lay open before her contained lessons in grammar and mathematics, but Emma was learning much larger lessons about courage, integrity, and the power of education to create opportunities for positive change. She was discovering that being different wasn't a disadvantage if you had the courage to use your uniqueness to make the world more inclusive and understanding. October brought an early and brutal winter to the mountains, with temperatures dropping far below normal and snow beginning to accumulate weeks ahead of schedule. Emma had been attending school for 2 months when the weather turned severe, making the daily ride to town increasingly treacherous. On a particularly bitter morning, with wind howling down from the peaks and snow falling so heavily that visibility was reduced to mere yards, Emma woke feeling unwell. She had a slight headache and a scratchy throat, but she insisted on attending school despite Joseph's suggestion that she stay home. "I have a recitation today, Papa," she said, pulling on her warmest clothes. "Mrs. Henderson is expecting me to present my essay about traditional plant medicines. I can't miss it." Joseph studied her pale face with growing concern, but he recognized the determination in her voice. Emma had worked hard to earn her place at the school, and she was reluctant to give her critics any reason to question her commitment to her education. The ride to town was miserable, with icy wind cutting through their heavy coats and the horses struggling through deepening drifts. By the time they reached the schoolhouse, Emma was shivering violently, though she insisted it was just from the cold. Her recitation went well, with Emma presenting her research on Apache medicinal practices to a classroom that listened with respectful attention. Mrs. Henderson praised her work, particularly noting how Emma had connected traditional knowledge with contemporary scientific understanding. But even as Emma basked in the academic success, she felt increasingly unwell. By afternoon, her mild symptoms had evolved into something more serious. Her head pounded, her throat felt raw, and she had begun to develop a fever that made concentration difficult. When Mrs. Henderson noticed Emma swaying slightly at her desk, she immediately sent word to Joseph. The ride home was a nightmare. Emma's fever spiked dramatically, and she began to lose consciousness intermittently, forcing Joseph to hold her upright in the saddle while managing both horses through the storm. By the time they reached the cabin, Emma was delirious, burning with fever, and mumbling incoherently about her mother and strange visions that made no sense. Joseph carried her inside and immediately began the battle for her life. He had seen fever like this before, during his time with the cavalry, and he knew how quickly it could kill. Emma's temperature was dangerously high, her breathing labored, and her skin had taken on a frighteningly pale, almost translucent quality. Working with the efficiency of someone trained in field medicine, Joseph stripped Emma of her wet clothes and wrapped her in cool, damp cloths to bring down her fever. He prepared willow bark tea for its fever-reducing properties and tried to get small sips of liquid into her, even when she was too delirious to cooperate consciously. But as the hours passed and Emma's condition continued to deteriorate, Joseph realized he needed help beyond his own medical knowledge. The storm made travel to town impossible, but there was one other option. Dr. Reynolds, the town's physician, who lived on a ranch about 5 miles away. Joseph faced an agonizing choice. Leaving Emma alone in her current condition could be fatal, but trying to transport her through the storm in her weakened state might kill her as well. Dr. Reynolds was their only hope for professional medical care, but there was no guarantee the doctor would come, especially given the prejudices Joseph had encountered from some community members. As Emma's fever reached dangerous levels and she began having convulsions, Joseph made his decision. He wrapped her in every warm blanket he could find, built up the fire to maintain heat in the cabin, and rode out into the storm toward Dr. Reynolds' ranch. The journey was treacherous, with snow so deep that his horse could barely make progress, and wind so fierce that he could hardly stay in the saddle. Twice he lost the trail completely and had to rely on his tracking skills to find his way back to the correct path. The temperature was so cold that his breath formed ice crystals immediately, and he could feel frostbite beginning to numb his hands and feet. When he finally reached Dr. Reynolds' ranch, he pounded on the door with hands so numb he could barely form fists. The doctor answered, clearly surprised to see anyone traveling in such weather. "Dr. Reynolds," Joseph said, through chattering teeth, "my daughter is dying. Fever, convulsions. I need your help." Dr. Reynolds hesitated, and Joseph could see the conflict in the man's eyes. Professional duty warred with personal prejudices, and for a moment Joseph feared that Emma would die because of the color of his skin. "Please," Joseph added, his voice breaking with desperation. "She's just a child." Something in Joseph's tone, perhaps the raw anguish of a father facing the loss of his child, broke through Dr. Reynolds' hesitation. "Let me get my bag," he said, already reaching for his coat. The return journey was even more difficult, with 2 riders fighting their way through the storm, Reynolds' horse struggling to keep pace with Joseph's more sure-footed mountain animal. By the time they reached the cabin, both men were exhausted and half frozen, but Joseph's only concern was getting medical help to Emma. What Dr. Reynolds found when he examined Emma sent chills through both men. Her fever had reached 104 degrees. She was barely conscious, and her breathing was so labored that each breath seemed like it might be her last. "This is scarlet fever," Dr. Reynolds diagnosed grimly. "It's very serious, especially at this stage. I'll do what I can, but I have to tell you honestly that her chances aren't good." Working together, Joseph and Dr. Reynolds fought for Emma's life through the long night. They used ice from outside to create cooling baths, administered medicine to support her heart and breathing, and took turns sitting vigil while she hovered between life and death. Joseph found himself praying as he had never prayed before, calling on both the Christian God he had learned about in his cavalry days and the Apache spirits of his ancestors. He burned sage and sweetgrass, creating sacred smoke that filled the cabin with the scent of traditional healing ceremonies. He chanted healing songs his grandmother had taught him, weaving together every spiritual resource he possessed in his desperate attempt to call Emma back from the edge of death. Dr. Reynolds, despite his initial reluctance to come, found himself moved by Joseph's obvious devotion to Emma and his sophisticated knowledge of both traditional and practical medicine. As they worked together through the night, the doctor began to understand that this was not some inappropriate arrangement, but a genuine father-daughter bond forged by love and commitment. "She's lucky to have you," Dr. Reynolds said during one of their brief rest periods. "I've seen plenty of natural parents who wouldn't fight this hard for their children." Joseph looked at Emma's pale, still face on the pillow, her breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. "She saved my life when she knocked on my door," he replied quietly. "I'd give anything to save hers now." The crisis came just before dawn. Emma's fever broke suddenly, her temperature dropping so rapidly that for a terrifying moment both men thought they had lost her. But then her breathing deepened, her color began to improve, and she opened her eyes for the first time in 18 hours. "Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible but unmistakably conscious. Joseph felt tears streaming down his face as he took her hand. "I'm here, daughter. You're going to be all right." Dr. Reynolds checked her pulse and temperature with professional thoroughness, then sat back with obvious relief. "The fever's broken," he announced. "She's not out of danger yet, but the worst is past." Emma's recovery was slow but steady. For a week, she remained weak and easily tired, but each day brought small improvements in her strength and alertness. Joseph barely left her side, maintaining constant vigilance and providing the patient care that gradually nursed her back to health. Dr. Reynolds visited twice more during Emma's convalescence, each time marveling at the quality of care she was receiving and the obvious depth of the bond between father and daughter. On his final visit, he made a confession that surprised them both. "Joseph, I owe you an apology," he said as he packed his medical bag. "I came here reluctantly, influenced by gossip and prejudice, but watching you care for Emma has shown me what real family looks like. She's lucky to have a father who loves her so completely." As Emma slowly returned to full health, she was aware that something fundamental had changed in their relationship with the broader community. Reynolds' advocacy, combined with the obvious devotion Joseph had shown during her illness, began to shift public opinion about their family arrangement. The medicine bundle that Joseph had used during Emma's healing, containing sacred herbs, healing stones and ceremonial items passed down through generations, became a symbol of the spiritual protection that surrounded their family. Emma understood now that she was protected, not just by Joseph's love and vigilance, but by the accumulated wisdom and spiritual power of his ancestors. "Papa," she said one evening as she sat up in bed for the first time since her illness, "I heard you praying for me in Apache. Will you teach me those prayers?" Joseph smiled, taking her hands in his. "Yes, daughter. They are healing prayers, and they belong to you now just as much as they belong to me." As autumn moved toward winter and Emma gradually returned to her normal activities, both of them carried the knowledge that they had faced the ultimate test of their bond and emerged stronger than ever. Their love had been tested by the threat of death and proven unbreakable. More importantly, their family had gained acceptance from at least some members of the community who had witnessed their devotion to each other during the crisis. The medicine bundle rested in its place of honor beside Emma's bed, a reminder that she was protected by traditions stretching back through countless generations of Stone Bear ancestors. She was no longer just Joseph's adopted daughter. She was a true inheritor of his people's spiritual heritage, blessed by the healing ceremonies that had called her back from the edge of death. Spring arrived with unusual warmth, melting the mountain snow faster than normal and creating a sense of urgency throughout the valley. Emma had just turned 13, celebrating with a quiet family dinner and the presentation of a beautiful leather-bound journal that Joseph had commissioned from the town's leather worker. But their peaceful routine was shattered on a warm May evening when the smell of smoke woke them both from sleep. Emma rushed to the window and gasped at what she saw. A crude wooden cross, about 6 feet tall, burned in their front yard, its flames casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. The message was unmistakable. Their family was no longer just unwelcome, but actively threatened. Joseph was already moving, pulling on his boots and reaching for his rifle. "Emma, stay inside and away from the windows," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to danger. But Emma had grown too much over the past year to simply hide while their home was under attack. She grabbed the water bucket from beside the kitchen stove and followed Joseph outside, despite his protests. Together, they doused the burning cross, stamping out the flames and reducing the threatening symbol to a pile of charred wood and ash. As they worked, Emma noticed details that suggested careful planning. The cross had been constructed from new lumber rather than scrap wood, and it had been positioned precisely to be visible from their cabin window. "Papa," she said, as they examined the remains, "this wasn't some spontaneous act. Someone spent time and effort to plan this." Joseph nodded grimly, his tracking skills revealing additional disturbing information. Multiple horses, at least 4 men. They approached from the east trail and left heading toward town. The next morning brought a visit from Sheriff Morrison, not the territorial judge, but his nephew who served as the local law enforcement officer. Sheriff Morrison was a fair-minded man who had been supportive of their family arrangement, but his expression as he examined the burned cross was deeply troubled. "Joseph, Emma," he said after completing his investigation, "I'm afraid this incident is part of a larger pattern. There have been similar threats against other families in the territory. Anyone who's considered different or who challenges the established social order." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "What kind of pattern, Sheriff Morris?" "There's an organization that's been growing throughout the mountain territories," he explained, reluctantly. "They call themselves the Order of Western Purity, and they target anyone they consider a threat to what they call traditional American values. Mixed families, immigrant communities, anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable." Joseph's expression darkened as he processed this information. "Are you saying we're dealing with organized opposition rather than just local prejudice?" "I'm afraid so. And I have to warn you that the threats may escalate beyond symbolic gestures. We've had reports from other areas of property damage, physical confrontations, even some families being driven from their home." That afternoon, Emma discovered the second manifestation of the escalating threat when she went to check on their vegetable garden. Someone had systematically destroyed weeks of careful work, trampling seedlings and pouring salt on the soil to prevent anything from growing. The attack on their garden felt particularly cruel because it targeted their ability to sustain themselves through the coming winter. Joseph found her standing among the ruined plants, tears streaming down her face as she surveyed the destruction. "Why would they do this, Papa?" she asked, her voice thick with hurt and anger. "We've never done anything to harm anyone." Joseph knelt beside her in the damaged garden, his large hands gentle as he examined the extent of the sabotage. "Emma, some people are threatened by anything that challenges their understanding of how the world should be. Our family proves that love can cross cultural boundaries and that threatens people who need to believe that differences make cooperation impossible. That evening, Emma made a decision that both frightened and impressed Joseph. She announced her intention to keep a detailed record of the harassment they were experiencing, documenting dates, descriptions, and evidence that could be used to identify their attackers. "If we're going to fight this," she said with determination that reminded Joseph of her mother's fierce courage, "we need to fight it intelligently. That means keeping records and building a case that will hold up in court." Emma's journal became her weapon of choice in their battle against organized intimidation. She recorded not just the incidents themselves, but also the community responses, the support they received from allies like Dr. Reynolds and Mrs. Henderson, and the gradual changes in public opinion that suggested the harassment was actually strengthening rather than weakening their position. The journal's leather cover, tooled with both Apache and Celtic designs in honor of her friendship with Danny O'Sullivan, became a symbol of her refusal to be intimidated. She carried it with her to school, to town, and on their rides around the property, always ready to document new incidents or supportive gestures from community members. Her methodical approach to recording the harassment impressed even Sheriff Morrison when she presented him with detailed accounts of each incident, complete with physical evidence and witness observation. "Emma," he said as he reviewed her careful documentation, "this is exactly the kind of evidence we need to build a case against these people. Your attention to detail and your objective reporting style would make any lawyer proud." But the harassment continued to escalate despite their careful documentation. Anonymous letters began appearing, left under their door or nailed to trees around their property. The letters contained increasingly explicit threats against both Joseph and Emma, promising violence if they didn't leave the territory voluntarily. Emma read each letter with the same careful attention she brought to her academic work, analyzing the handwriting, paper quality, and language patterns for clues about their authors' identities and education levels. "Papa," she said one evening, as they reviewed the latest batch of threatening correspondence, "I think at least 3 of these letters were written by the same person. Look at how they form their letter G, and the way they misspelled definite." Joseph marveled at his daughter's analytical skills, even as he worried about the psychological impact of focusing so intensely on threats against their safety. "Emma, I'm impressed by your detective work, but I don't want this harassment to consume all your energy. You're 13 years old and you should be able to focus on learning and growing, not defending our right to exist." Emma looked up from the threatening letter she was examining, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Papa, they're trying to make us afraid, trying to make us question whether we belong here, but this is our home, and we have just as much right to live here peacefully as anyone else. If documenting their crimes helps protect other families from going through this, then it's important work." The Burned Cross incident had marked a turning point in their situation, transforming isolated acts of prejudice into organized campaign of intimidation. But Emma's response, methodical documentation combined with unwavering determination to defend their right to exist as a family, had transformed her from a target into an active participant in the fight for justice. As she worked by lamplight each evening, adding new entries to her journal and organizing evidence for Sheriff Morrison's investigation, Emma embodied the lessons Joseph had taught her about courage, honor, and the importance of standing up for what was right. She was no longer just defending her own family. She was creating a record that could protect other vulnerable families facing similar threats. The journal, with its careful handwriting and precise documentation, represented more than just evidence gathering. It was Emma's declaration that she would not be silenced or intimidated, that she had the intelligence and courage to fight back against organized hatred using the tools of education, law, and persistent truth-telling. The Burned Cross had been intended to drive them away through fear. Instead, it had sparked Emma's transformation into a fierce defender of justice, someone who understood that the best way to fight darkness was to shine light on it, with unwavering dedication to truth and evidence. The confrontation Emma had been preparing for came on a sweltering July morning, when a delegation of 12 men rode up to their cabin with the obvious intention of ending their family arrangement once and for all. Emma recognized several faces from town, including Tom Brennan and 2 members of the town council, but there were others she didn't know. Men with hard faces and expensive clothes who clearly weren't local residents. Joseph emerged from the cabin with his rifle, but Emma surprised him by stepping out beside him carrying not a weapon, but her leather-bound journal and a thick folder containing all the evidence she had been collecting. "Gentlemen," Joseph said calmly, though Emma could see the tension in his posture, "you're trespassing on private property. State your business and then leave." The leader of the group, a well-dressed man with silver hair and cold eyes, dismounted and stepped forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his orders followed. "Mr. Stonebear, I'm Richard Caulfield, representing the Territorial Committee for Community Standards. We're here to discuss your continued violation of social order and to offer you one final opportunity to resolve this matter peacefully." Emma stepped forward before Joseph could respond, her journal clutched firmly in her hands. At 13, she had grown tall enough to look most of the men directly in the eye, and her voice carried a clear authority that surprised even Joseph. "Miss Caulfield," she said with the precise diction Miss Henderson had taught her, "before you continue making threats against our family, I think you should know that every act of harassment, every threatening letter, and every incident of property damage has been carefully documented and reported to territorial authorities." Caulfield's expression shifted from condescending confidence to sharp attention. "Young lady, this is a conversation between adults. Children should be seen and not heard." Emma opened her journal to a specific page, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Sir, I am Emma Stonebear, and this is my family and my home. I have every right to participate in any conversation that affects my future." She began reading from her journal in a clear voice that carried across the yard. July th. Anonymous letter delivered to property threatening physical harm to family members. Letter written on expensive paper with distinctive watermark, suggesting author has significant financial resources. Handwriting analysis indicates probable connection to previous correspondence. "That's enough," Caulfield interrupted sharply, but Emma continued reading. July 8th. Vegetable garden destroyed by systematic trampling and application of salt to soil. Boot prints indicate at least 3 individuals, one wearing expensive leather boots with distinctive heel pattern, consistent with Eastern manufacturing. Tom Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mr. Caulfield, maybe we should reconsider this approach. The girl seems to have been paying closer attention than we thought." But Emma wasn't finished. She flipped to another section of her journal, her confidence growing as she watched the uncertainty spreading through the group. "I've also documented the community support our family has received," she continued. "Dr. Reynolds has provided a written statement about the quality of medical care I received during my illness. Henderson has submitted a formal report about my academic progress to the Territorial Education Board. Sheriff Morrison has opened an official investigation into the organized harassment campaign." Caulfield's face darkened with anger. "Miss Matthews, or whatever you're calling yourself now, you don't seem to understand the gravity of your situation. There are forces at work here larger than your childish record-keeping." Emma felt Joseph tense beside her, but she maintained her composure as she delivered the statement she had been preparing for weeks. "Mr. Caulfield, my name is Emma Stonebear, and I understand the situation perfectly. You represent people who believe that family should be determined by the color of someone's skin, rather than by love and commitment. You're trying to use fear and intimidation to force us to abandon our home because our existence challenges your narrow understanding of what family can be." She paused, looking directly at each man in the group before continuing. "But you've made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed that we would be isolated and defenseless. Instead, you've discovered that we have allies throughout this community, people who judge families by their character rather than their appearance. Your campaign of harassment has actually strengthened our position by revealing the difference between people who support justice and people who support prejudice." Joseph placed a proud hand on Emma's shoulder, drawing strength from her courage while preparing to defend her if the confrontation turned violent. Furthermore, Emma continued, I want you to understand that I'm not a victim of some inappropriate arrangement. I'm a young woman who has been given the best possible foundation for life by a father who loves me unconditionally and has taught me to think for myself. I choose to be Emma Stone Bear, and I choose this family, and I choose this. Caulfield stepped closer, his mask of civilized authority slipping to reveal underlying anger. Miss, you may think you're very clever with your little journal and your speeches, but you're still just a child who doesn't understand the adult world. There are consequences for defying the natural order. Emma's eyes blazed with fury, but her voice remained steady. Sir, I understand the adult world better than you think. I understand that some adults use their power to protect children, and some use it to threaten them. I understand that some adults build communities based on inclusion and respect, while others try to maintain privilege through exclusion and fear. I know which kind of adult I want to become, and I know which kind my father is. She opened her journal to a page near the back, revealing a list of names and signatures. I also understand that your natural order is not supported by the majority of our community. I've collected statements from 47 residents who support our family arrangement and oppose the harassment campaign. They include the schoolteacher, the doctor, the pastor of the Methodist Church, and most of the business owners in town. The revelation clearly shocked several members of Caulfield's group. Tom Brennan looked particularly uncomfortable as he realized how isolated his position had become. Judge Morrison chose that moment to ride into the yard, arriving as if summoned by the confrontation. His presence immediately changed the dynamic of the situation, transforming an attempted intimidation into an official legal proceeding. Gentlemen, Judge Morrison said with the authority of his office, I received word that there might be some difficulty here today. Miss Caulfield, I believe we've met before. Caulfield's expression grew even more hostile. Judge Morrison, yes, we've had occasion to discuss your liberal interpretations of territorial law. Indeed we have, the judge replied coolly, and I believe I made my position quite clear regarding the Stone Bear family arrangement. Emma, would you mind sharing your documentation with me? Emma handed over her journal and folder with obvious satisfaction. Judge Morrison spent several minutes reviewing her careful records, his expression growing increasingly serious as he absorbed the evidence of systematic harassment. Miss Caulfield, he said finally, based on the evidence Miss Stone Bear has compiled, it appears that you and your associates have engaged in a sustained campaign of criminal harassment against this family. I'm prepared to issue warrants for the arrest of anyone who continues to threaten or intimidate these residents. The confrontation reached its climax when Caulfield made one final attempt to assert his authority. Judge, you cannot seriously believe that the territorial government will continue to support arrangements that violate every principle of civilized society. There are higher authorities than local magistrates. Emma stepped forward once more, her young voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Caulfield, you keep talking about civilization and natural order, but you haven't explained why a family based on love and mutual respect is less civilized than a community based on hatred and exclusion. You haven't explained why the color of someone's skin matters more than the content of their character. You haven't explained why your definition of family should take priority over mine. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her final statement. What I see here today is a young woman who has been educated, loved, and prepared for life by someone who chose to be her father. I see a man who has dedicated himself to raising a child who needed protection and guidance. I see a family that contributes positively to their community and asks only to be left in peace. If that threatens your understanding of how the world should work, then perhaps your understanding needs to change rather than our family. The power of Emma's words, combined with Judge Morrison's legal authority and the evidence of community support, finally broke Caulfield's resolve. He remounted his horse with obvious frustration, his carefully planned intimidation having backfired completely. This isn't over, he said, as his group prepared to leave. There are forces at work that go beyond this isolated valley. Emma looked up at him with the serene confidence of someone who had discovered her own strength. Sir, you're wrong about one thing. This is over, at least for our family. We've proven that we belong here, and we've proven that love is stronger than hatred. Whatever forces you represent, they'll have to find different targets, because we're not going anywhere. As the group rode away, Emma felt the deep satisfaction of having stood her ground against organized intimidation and won. Her journal had become more than just a record of harassment. It had become the foundation for a legal and moral victory that secured their family's place in the community. Judge Morrison examined the journal one more time before handing it back to Emma with obvious admiration. "Miss Stone-Bear," he said formally, "your documentation and your presentation today were remarkable. You've not only defended your own family, you've created a precedent that will protect other vulnerable families throughout the territory." That evening, as Emma updated her journal with an account of the day's victory, she reflected on how much she had changed since that desperate morning when she had knocked on Joseph's door seeking work. She had found not just a home and a father, but also her own voice and the courage to use it in defense of justice. The journal that lay open before her represented more than careful record-keeping. It was evidence of her transformation from a frightened, powerless child into a confident young woman who could stand up to adult authorities and defend her right to choose her own family. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice was simply the persistent documentation of truth. The victory over Caulfield's intimidation campaign marked a turning point, not just for Emma and Joseph's family, but for the entire community. In the weeks following the confrontation, people who had remained silent during the harassment began speaking up in support of the Stone-Bear family, creating a network of allies that surprised even Emma with its breadth and diversity. The first unexpected ally emerged from an impossible source. Captain William Harrison, the commanding officer who had served with Joseph during his cavalry days. Captain Harrison arrived at their cabin on a warm August morning, his military bearings still evident despite his civilian clothes and the gray in his hair. "Sergeant Stone-Bear," he said, using Joseph's old military rank with obvious respect. "I heard about the trouble you've been having, and I came as soon as I could arrange leave from my current posting." Joseph's expression shifted through surprise, pleasure, and wariness as he recognized his former commanding officer. Their parting had been complicated, involving Joseph's disillusionment with Army policies toward Apache civilians and his decision to leave military service rather than participate in actions he considered morally wrong. "Captain Harrison," Joseph replied carefully, "I'm surprised to see you here. This is my daughter, Emma." Emma studied the captain with the analytical attention she brought to all new encounters, noting his direct gaze, confident posture, and the way he looked at Joseph with obvious respect, despite their complicated history. "Miss Stone-Bear," Captain Harrison said, extending his hand with the courtesy he would show any officer's daughter. "Your father was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to command. His tracking skills and tactical intelligence saved countless lives during our service together." Emma shook his hand firmly, understanding that this moment represented some kind of test or opportunity. "Thank you, Captain. Papa has told me about his military service, though he doesn't often talk about the details." Captain Harrison's visit included more than social courtesy. He had brought with him an official letter from the Territorial Military Command, written on formal letterhead and sealed with impressive official stamps. "Joseph," he said, producing the document, "this is a formal character reference that details your military service record, including commendations for bravery and leadership. I've submitted it to the territorial authorities as evidence of your fitness as a guardian and citizen." Emma read the letter over Joseph's shoulder, amazed by the list of military honors and official recognition of his character and capabilities. The document described Joseph as an exemplary soldier whose courage, intelligence, and integrity made him invaluable to military operations, and a man whose judgment and character qualified him for the highest responsibilities. "Captain," Emma said thoughtfully, "why are you providing this support now? Papa left military service years ago, Captain Harrison's expression grew serious as he considered how to explain complex military and political realities to a 13-year-old. Miss Stonebear, your father left the army because he refused to participate in actions he considered morally wrong. At the time, I thought he was making a mistake. Since then, I've come to understand that he was actually demonstrating the kind of moral courage that makes someone a true leader. He paused, looking directly at Joseph with obvious regret and respect. Joseph, I should have supported your position then instead of trying to convince you to stay. You were right about the moral complexities of our situation, and you were right to prioritize your conscience over military convenience. This letter is my attempt to provide the support I should have offered years ago. The captain's visit created ripple effects throughout the community. The sight of a respected military officer treating Joseph with obvious esteem and Emma with paternal pride sent a clear message about the family's legitimacy and social standing. Miss Henderson capitalized on this momentum by arranging for Emma to present her research on traditional medicine to a gathering of territorial education officials who were visiting the area. The presentation took place in the schoolhouse on a Saturday afternoon, with community members invited to observe. Emma had prepared meticulously, creating visual aids that demonstrated the connections between Apache medicinal knowledge and contemporary scientific understanding. Her presentation included samples of local plants, explanations of their traditional uses, and descriptions of the chemical compounds that made them effective. The willow bark that Apache healers have used for centuries to treat pain and fever, Emma explained to the assembled audience, contains salicin, which the human body converts to salicylic acid, the same active ingredient found in modern aspirin. Reynolds, who had been invited to provide medical perspective on Emma's research, nodded approvingly as she described case studies where traditional and contemporary treatments had been combined with superior results. Miss Stonebear's work represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking that will advance frontier medicine, he told the education officials. She's not just memorizing textbook information, she's synthesizing knowledge from multiple sources to create new understanding. The presentation's success led to an unexpected opportunity, an invitation for Emma to spend a week during the following summer at the Territorial University in Denver, participating in an advanced academic program for exceptional students. Emma, said Professor Margaret Davidson, the education official who extended the invitation, your research demonstrates the kind of intellectual curiosity and analytical ability that we hope to encourage in all our students. This program would allow you to work with university-level instructors while maintaining your connection to your home community. But perhaps the most significant ally to emerge was someone Emma had never expected to support their family. Pastor Williams, the same minister who had once questioned the appropriateness of Joseph's guardianship. Pastor Williams requested a private meeting with Emma and Joseph, arriving at their cabin on a Sunday evening with the humble manner of someone seeking rather than offering guidance. Joseph, Emma, he began carefully, I owe you both an apology. I allowed prejudice and conventional thinking to cloud my judgment about your family arrangement. Watching how you've both responded to harassment and adversity has shown me what Christian behavior actually looks like. Emma studied the pastor's face, recognizing genuine remorse and something that might be respect. Pastor Williams, what changed your mind about our family? Several things, he replied honestly. Your courage during the confrontation with Caulfield's group, your father's obvious devotion to your welfare and education. Most importantly, the way you've both responded to hatred with dignity and grace rather than with anger or vengeance. Pastor Williams had come not just to apologize, but to offer concrete support. He had prepared a letter to be read from his pulpit the following Sunday, formally declaring his support for the Stonebear family and calling on his congregation to reject the harassment campaign. I've also been corresponding with other ministers throughout the territory, he continued. There's growing recognition that Christian charity means supporting families based on love, rather than judging them based on appearance or conventional expectation. As autumn approached and Emma prepared to begin her 8th year of school, she reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred in their community standing. What had begun as isolated opposition had evolved into organized harassment, but that harassment had ultimately created the conditions for widespread support that was stronger and more meaningful than mere tolerance. The letter from Captain Harrison, displayed in a place of honor on their mantelpiece, represented more than just official recognition of Joseph's character. It symbolized the power of moral courage to earn respect, even from those who had initially disagreed with difficult decisions. Emma's academic success and her eloquent defense of their family had demonstrated that she was not a victim of some inappropriate arrangement, but a young woman who had been given exceptional opportunities for growth and development. Her research presentation had shown the community that her unique background was an asset rather than a disadvantage, allowing her to make connections and insights that might not occur to students from more conventional circumstances. Pastor William's support represented perhaps the most significant victory of all, showing that even institutional authority could be moved by evidence of genuine love and commitment. His public endorsement from the pulpit would carry weight with community members who might otherwise remain suspicious or hostile. As Emma worked on her journal that evening, documenting the remarkable changes in their situation, she understood that they had achieved something more than mere acceptance. They had created a new model for what family could be, one that honored both individual heritage and chosen bonds, one that demonstrated that love could indeed transcend conventional boundaries when supported by courage, integrity, and persistent commitment to truth. The allies who had emerged to support their family represented more than personal friendships. They embodied a growing recognition throughout the territory that strength came from inclusion rather than exclusion, that communities were enriched rather than threatened by diversity, and that the quality of family relationships mattered more than their conventional appearance. Emma's 14th birthday arrived with the soft warmth of early spring and the uncomfortable awareness that she was becoming a young woman, rather than simply a bright child. The physical changes of adolescence had begun in earnest over the winter, bringing with them questions about identity and belonging that were more complex than any she had faced before. Joseph noticed the changes first in practical ways: Emma's dresses becoming too short, her need for privacy during bathing and dressing, and the subtle shift in how men in town looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention. But the deeper changes were emotional and psychological, involving Emma's growing curiosity about her place in the world beyond their mountain homestead. The catalyst for these new challenges came in the form of a letter from Uncle Tom, her father's brother, who had maintained irregular correspondence since his visit 2 years earlier. His latest letter contained news that would force Emma to confront questions she had been content to leave unanswered. "Emma," Uncle Tom wrote in his careful script, "I've been investigating our family history more thoroughly, and I've discovered some information about your mother's background that you might find interesting. Sarah Matthews was born Sarah Catherine O'Brien in County Cork, Ireland, and she immigrated to America with her family when she was 16 years old." The letter continued with details about relatives Emma had never known existed: cousins in Boston, an aunt who had become a teacher in Philadelphia, and a grandmother who had died just the previous winter, but who had asked about Emma in her final letters. "Your mother's family has been asking about you," Uncle Tom continued. "They would very much like to meet you and to learn about the life you've built with your adoptive father. They understand that you've found a good home, but they hope you might be interested in learning more about your Irish heritage as well." Emma read the letter several times, feeling a mixture of excitement and confusion that she couldn't quite understand. The discovery that she had living relatives who wanted to know her was thrilling, but it also raised questions about loyalty and belonging that made her uncomfortable. That evening, as she and Joseph worked together on their respective projects, Emma embroidering a pillowcase while Joseph repaired a saddle, she broached the subject that had been troubling her all day. "Papa," she said carefully, "if I wanted to learn more about my mother's family, would you think I was being disloyal to you and our Apache heritage?" Joseph set down his tools and gave Emma his full attention, recognizing the importance of her question and the complexity of the emotions behind it. "Emma," he said thoughtfully, "learning about your mother's heritage wouldn't diminish your connection to our family any more than learning Apache traditions diminished your love for your mother's memory. You carry multiple legacies, and understanding all of them makes you stronger, not more divided." Emma nodded, but Joseph could see that his reassurance hadn't completely resolved her internal conflict. "What's really troubling you, daughter?" Emma set down her embroidery and looked directly at Joseph, with eyes that seemed older than her 14 years. "Papa, I'm afraid that if I start exploring my Irish heritage, people will expect me to choose between being Emma Stonebear and being Emma O'Brien. I'm afraid that learning about my mother's family will make me feel like I don't fully belong anywhere." Joseph moved to sit beside Emma on the sofa, his presence providing the comfort and stability she had learned to depend on during moments of uncertainty. "Emma, do you remember the story I told you about the river that flows from many sources? Your identity is like that river. The Irish heritage from your mother, the Apache traditions I've shared with you, the frontier experiences we've had together, the education you've received, all of these streams flow together to create who you are. You don't have to choose between them." To help Emma work through her conflicted feelings, Joseph suggested a project that would allow her to explore her questions through concrete action rather than abstract worry. Together, they would create what he called a heritage map, a visual representation of all the different influences that had shaped her identity. Emma embraced the project with enthusiasm, spending weeks researching and creating a large drawing that showed the various streams of influence in her life. She drew the mountains of Apache territory alongside the green hills of Ireland, the frontier cabin where she had found safety beside the urban neighborhoods where her mother's family lived, the traditional medicines of Joseph's people alongside the formal education she was receiving in school. The heritage map became more than just an art project. It became a tool for understanding how different aspects of her identity could coexist and strengthen each other, rather than competing for dominance. But the map also revealed a gap in Emma's understanding of herself. She realized that she knew very little about what it meant to be a young woman in any of her heritage traditions. Joseph had been wonderful at teaching her practical skills and moral principles, but there were aspects of growing up female that were outside his experience and expertise. This realization led to an unexpected conversation with Mrs. Henderson, who had noticed Emma's increasing maturity and the new questions that came with adolescence. "Emma," Miss Henderson said after school one afternoon, "I've been thinking that it might be helpful for you to spend some time with women who can answer the questions that naturally arise as girls become young women. Would you be interested in joining a group I'm organizing for the older female students?" The mains discussion group met weekly at Mrs. Henderson's home, providing a space for teenage girls to talk about the challenges and opportunities they faced as they prepared for adulthood. Emma was initially shy about participating, uncertain whether she would fit in with girls who had grown up in more conventional families. But she quickly discovered that adolescence created common ground that transcended differences in background and family structure. All the girls were dealing with questions about their future roles, their educational opportunities, and their place in a world that often limited women's choices. Emma asked Rebecca Martinez during one of their discussions, "Do you ever think about getting married and having your own family someday?" Emma considered the question seriously, realizing that she had given very little thought to conventional expectations about women's roles and future. "I think about it sometimes," she replied honestly, "but I also think about other possibilities. Maybe I'd like to become a teacher like Mrs. Henderson, or maybe a doctor like the women I've read about who are working in hospitals back east. I want to have choices about my future, not just accept what other people expect." The discussion revealed that Emma's unconventional upbringing had actually given her a broader sense of possibility than many of her peers possessed. While other girls were being prepared primarily for domestic roles, Emma had been encouraged to develop her intellect, her independence, and her ability to contribute to her community in multiple ways. One afternoon, Emma discovered her mother's wedding ring while exploring a trunk in Joseph's room that contained items from her previous life. The ring was simple but beautiful, a thin gold band that showed the wear of years of daily use. Hidden with it was a chain, suggesting that her mother had worn the ring as a necklace after her husband's disappearance. When Emma showed Joseph the ring, he understood immediately that she had found more than just a piece of jewelry. She had discovered a tangible connection to her mother's hopes and dreams, to the young woman who had married for love and held on to that love even when circumstances became difficult. "Papa," Emma said, holding the ring up to catch the light, "do you think my mother would be proud of who I'm becoming?" Joseph took the ring gently, examining the worn gold with the same reverence Emma had shown. "Emma, I think your mother would be amazed by your courage, your intelligence, and your compassion. I think she would be proud that you've learned to honor multiple heritages while creating your own unique identity." That evening, Joseph helped Emma thread the ring onto a new chain, creating a necklace that would allow her to carry her mother's memory while leaving her hands free for the work of building her own future. As Emma fastened the chain around her neck, she felt a sense of completeness that had been missing from her understanding of herself. She was Emma Stonebear, daughter of Joseph and inheritor of Apache traditions. She was also Emma O'Brien, daughter of Sarah and keeper of Irish memories. Most importantly, she was Emma herself, a young woman who was learning to draw strength from all her heritages, while creating something new and uniquely her own. The wedding ring on its chain represented more than maternal connection. It symbolized the possibility of honoring the past, while remaining free to choose the future. Emma was discovering that growing up didn't mean abandoning her family or her heritage. It meant expanding her understanding of how she could contribute to the world, while maintaining the bonds that had given her strength and identity. At 16, Emma had grown into a young woman whose presence commanded respect in any room she entered. Tall and strong from years of mountain living, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's steady gaze, she moved through the world with a confidence that reflected the solid foundation of love and education Joseph had provided. The summer of her 16th year brought a project that would test everything she had learned about leadership, responsibility, and the power of family bonds to create positive change in the world. A new family had arrived in the valley, the Kowalskis, Polish immigrants who had fled religious persecution in their homeland and were struggling to establish themselves in the American frontier. The Kowalski family consisted of parents, 3 teenage children, and 7-year-old Katya, a serious little girl who reminded Emma powerfully of herself at that age. The family spoke little English, had no established connections in the community, and were facing the same kind of suspicion and hostility that Emma and Joseph had once encountered. When Emma first met Katya at the general store, the child was standing silently beside her mother, her large dark eyes taking in everything around her with the hyper-alert weariness of someone who had learned to expect trouble. She wore a dress that had been carefully mended multiple times and boots that were too large for her feet, stuffed with rags to keep them from slipping off. The sight hit Emma like a physical blow, transporting her instantly back to her own desperate afternoon knocking on doors and begging for work. Without conscious thought, she knelt down to Katya's level and spoke to her in the gentle tone Joseph had used during their first meeting. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Emma. What's yours?" Katya looked uncertainly toward her mother, who nodded encouragingly despite her own obvious nervousness about the interaction. "Katya," the child whispered, her accent making the name sound like a soft melody. "That's a beautiful name," Emma replied. "Would you like to see something special?" Emma pulled from her pocket the wooden horse Joseph had carved for her years earlier, the same figurine that had been her first treasure in their family. Katya's eyes widened with wonder as she examined the intricate carving, her small fingers tracing the flowing mane and powerful legs with reverent attention. "My papa made this for me when I was about your age," Emma explained. "I was new here too, and I was scared because everything was different and I didn't know if I belonged." Mrs. Kowalski listened to the conversation with growing interest, clearly understanding more English than she felt comfortable speaking. "You new here too?" she asked hesitantly. Emma stood and addressed Mrs. Kowalski with the respectful manner Joseph had taught her to use with adults. "Yes, ma'am. I came here when I was 10 years old, and I had to learn how to make a new home in a place where everything was unfamiliar. It can be very frightening, but it can also be wonderful if you find the right people to help you. That afternoon, Emma made a decision that would define much of her remaining time at home. She asked Joseph if she could take on the responsibility of helping the Kowalski family integrate into the community, using everything she had learned about building bridges between different worlds. "Papa," she said as they discussed her proposal over dinner, "I remember how scary it was to feel like an outsider, to wonder if anyone would ever accept me or treat me with kindness. I can't walk past that little girl knowing that I have the ability to make her transition easier." Joseph studied his daughter with pride and something that might have been awe. "Emma, what you're proposing is a significant commitment. Teaching a family to navigate a new culture, helping them establish themselves economically, defending them against the prejudice they're likely to encounter. That's essentially the work of a community leader." Emma met his gaze steadily. "Then maybe it's time for me to learn how to be a community leader." The project Emma undertook with the Kowalski family became her masterpiece of applied learning, combining everything Joseph had taught her about courage and compassion with everything her formal education had provided about communication and problem solving. She began by organizing English lessons for the entire family, meeting with them 3 evenings a week in their small cabin. But she quickly realized that language was only one barrier they faced. They also needed help understanding American business practices, legal requirements, and social customs. Emma enlisted allies throughout the community, creating what amounted to an informal support network for immigrant families. Mrs. Henderson provided teaching materials and educational guidance. Dr. Reynolds offered medical care and helped the family understand health and sanitation practices that were different from their homeland traditions. Even Pastor Williams contributed, providing spiritual counseling and helping the family connect with other Polish Catholic families in neighboring settlements. But Emma's most innovative contribution was her idea to create what she called a cultural exchange program. Instead of simply teaching the Kowalski family to abandon their Polish heritage in favor of American customs, she organized community events where different families could share their traditions with each other. The first such event was a harvest celebration held in the schoolhouse, where the Kowalski family demonstrated traditional Polish folk dances, while Emma and Joseph shared Apache storytelling traditions. Mrs. Henderson contributed New England recipes, the Martinez family shared Mexican musical traditions, and even the O'Sullivan family offered Irish ballads. "This is what America should be," Emma said to the assembled community as the evening concluded. "Not a place where people have to abandon who they are to fit in, but a place where different traditions can coexist and enrich each other." The success of the cultural exchange program led to Emma's recognition as an unofficial community organizer, someone who could facilitate cooperation between different groups and help newcomers establish themselves successfully. By winter, she was regularly consulted by families facing integration challenges, and her reputation had spread to neighboring settlements. Joseph watched this development with mixed feelings. Pride in Emma's capabilities and character, combined with the growing awareness that she was outgrowing their isolated mountain homestead. The young woman who had once needed his protection and guidance was becoming someone capable of providing protection and guidance to others. The transition became evident in their daily routines as well. Emma had taken over much of the household management, not because Joseph couldn't handle it, but because she had developed systems and efficiencies that improved their quality of life. She had also begun contributing to their financial stability through her tutoring work and her small business making carved items to sell in town. "Papa," she said one evening as they worked together, building an addition to their cabin that would provide her with more private space, "I've been thinking about my future, about the choices I'll need to make in the next few years." Joseph paused in his soaring, recognizing the serious tone that indicated an important conversation was beginning. "I love our life here," Emma continued, "and I love our family, but I'm also aware that I have opportunities for education and service that might take me away from home, at least temporarily." Emma had been corresponding with Professor Davidson at the Territorial University, exploring possibilities for advanced education that would prepare her for a career in teaching or medicine. The professor had been encouraging about Emma's academic potential, while emphasizing the challenges she would face as a woman pursuing professional education in the 1880s. "I don't want to leave you, Papa," Emma said, her voice reflecting the genuine emotional conflict she felt. "But I also think that maybe the best way to honor everything you've taught me is to use my education to help other people who are facing the kind of challenges we've overcome." Joseph set down his tools and moved to sit beside Emma on the partially completed porch, the evening light casting long shadows across the addition they were building together. "Emma," he said with the wisdom that had guided their family through every crisis, "the purpose of raising a child is not to keep them forever, but to prepare them to create their own meaningful life. If your path leads you away from this mountain for a while, I'll support that choice because I know it comes from the values we've built together." That night, as Emma worked on a special project in her room, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from desperate orphan to confident young woman. The addition to their cabin represented more than additional living space. It symbolized her growth into someone who needed room to expand, while maintaining her connection to the family that had made that growth possible. The project she was working on would be her gift to the next child who needed what she had found in Joseph's care. Using skills he had taught her and materials they had gathered together, Emma was creating a wooden chest filled with items designed to help a fright-displaced child feel welcomed and valued. Carved toys, soft quilts, books appropriate for different reading levels, and a journal where a new family member could record their own story of finding home. The chest represented Emma's understanding that love was meant to be shared rather than hoarded, that the security she had found with Joseph created an obligation to extend similar security to others who needed it. She was preparing to pass forward the gift of belonging that had saved her life and shaped her character, as she carved Apache symbols into the lid of the chest alongside Celtic knots and Polish folk designs. Emma understood that she was creating more than just a welcome gift. She was crafting a symbol of the multicultural family she and Joseph had the potential to become, a home where children from any background could find acceptance and love. The chest would wait in the cabin's main room, ready for the day when another desperate child might knock on their door seeking shelter. Emma wanted that child to know immediately that they were entering a place where differences were celebrated rather than merely tolerated, where heritage was preserved rather than abandoned, where love could create family bonds stronger than blood. Joseph discovered the completed chest when he woke early one morning to find Emma sitting beside it, adding final touches to the carved decorations. The sight of his daughter preparing to welcome the next child who might need their family brought tears to his eyes as he understood the full circle their journey had created. "Emma," he said softly, "this is the most beautiful thing you've ever made." She looked up at him with a smile that carried all the confidence and compassion she had developed over their years together. "Papa, I learned from the best teacher in the world. I learned that the most important thing you can give someone is the knowledge that they belong somewhere, that someone values them exactly as they are." The chest stood ready, its carved surfaces telling the story of a family that had grown from desperate need into generous abundance. It represented Emma's transformation from someone who needed saving into someone capable of providing salvation for others. Most importantly, it embodied the truth that love, when freely given and faithfully maintained, creates an endless capacity for including more people in the circle of belonging. As spring arrived and Emma prepared for her final year of local schooling before making decisions about college and career, the chest waited patiently for the next chapter in their family's story. Whether that child would be Apache, Irish, Polish, or from some heritage not yet represented in their mountain home, they would find in the wooden chest a promise that they could become part of something larger than themselves while remaining true to who they were. Emma Stone Bear had learned to build bridges between worlds, and now she was preparing to help others cross those bridges toward the belonging that every child deserved. The cabin addition was nearly complete, providing space for growth and privacy while maintaining the connections that had sustained them through every challenge. Looking out over the valley where she had found her home and her identity, Emma felt ready for whatever future awaited her. She had learned that family was created through choice and sustained through love, that heritage was meant to be shared and expanded rather than guarded and isolated, and that the greatest gift anyone could receive was the knowledge that they mattered to someone else. The wooden chest gleamed in the morning light, ready to welcome whoever might need what Emma and Joseph had built together. A place where love could transform lives and where family could embrace anyone brave enough to knock on their door and ask for a chance to belong. The courthouse in Denver was more imposing than anything Emma had ever seen, its stone columns and formal architecture designed to inspire respect for the legal proceedings conducted within its walls. At 17, Emma sat beside Joseph in the judge's chambers, wearing her best dress and the Apache beadwork bracelet that had become as much a part of her identity as her given name. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to the local Judge Morrison, who had supported their family from the beginning, presided over the formal adoption proceedings that would legally cement what had been true in their hearts for 7 years. The paperwork spread across her desk represented the culmination of a legal process that had taken months to complete, involving background investigations, character references, and testimony from community members about the success of their family arrangement. "Miss Stone Bear," Judge Morrison began, her tone formal but not unkind, "these proceedings are somewhat unusual, given that you are now of an age where your own consent is required for adoption. The court needs to hear from you directly about your wishes regarding this legal formalization of your family relationship." Emma stood with the poise she had developed through years of defending her choices and explaining her identity to skeptical adults. Her voice was clear and confident as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, Joseph Stone Bear has been my father in every meaningful sense since I was 10 years old. He has provided me with love, protection, education, and moral guide. He has taught me to be proud of my heritage while also embracing the Apache traditions he has shared with me. I cannot imagine calling anyone else my father, and I want our relationship to be recognized legally as well as emotionally." Judge Morrison made notes as Emma spoke, clearly impressed by the young woman's articulate presentation and obvious maturity. "Mr. Stone Bear," the judge continued, "you understand that formal adoption creates permanent legal obligations and rights that Miss Stone Bear would inherit from you as your natural child would, and that you would be legally responsible for her welfare until she reaches majority." Joseph's response carried the weight of 7 years of shared experience and absolute certainty about their bond. "Your Honor, Emma has been my daughter since the day she knocked on my door seeking shelter. Legal recognition of that relationship doesn't change my commitment to her welfare. It simply acknowledges what has always been true. I am proud to be her father, and I want the law to reflect the reality we have built together." The formal testimony that followed documented the remarkable success of their unconventional family arrangement. Miss Henderson testified about Emma's academic achievements and her positive influence on other students. Dr. Reynolds spoke about the quality of care Emma had received during her illness and Joseph's obvious devotion to her welfare. Even Pastor Williams contributed a statement about their moral character and their positive contributions to the community. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source, Katia Kowalski, now 9 years old and fluent in English, who had asked to address the court about Emma's impact on her family's integration into American society. "Your Honor," Katia said in her clear, accented voice, "Emma Stone Bear saved my family when we came to America. She taught us English and helped us understand how to live here. She showed us that you can keep your old traditions while learning new ones. She is like a big sister to me, and she learned how to help people from her papa, who taught her that family is about love, not about looking the same." Katya's testimony, delivered with the earnest conviction of a child speaking absolute truth, seemed to move Judge Morrison more than any of the adult witnesses had managed. The sight of this Polish immigrant child defending the Apache white family that had helped her integrate successfully illustrated the positive impact their model of inclusive family building had created. The judge's decision was unanimous and unequivocal. Based on the evidence presented and the clear wishes of both parties, this court grants the petition for adoption. Emma Stone Bear is hereby legally recognized as the daughter of Joseph Stone Bear, with all the rights and responsibilities that relationship entails. The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo through years of struggle and triumph, officially recognizing what everyone in the courtroom had long understood: that love and commitment could create family bonds that were stronger and more meaningful than those determined by accident of birth. As they left the courthouse, Emma carried the official adoption papers in a leather folder Joseph had made specially for the occasion. The document was more than legal recognition. It was vindication of every choice they had made, every challenge they had faced, and every principle they had maintained in building their unconventional family. "Papa," Emma said as they stood on the courthouse steps, looking out over the bustling city that represented opportunities and challenges neither of them had imagined 7 years earlier. "I know this doesn't change anything between us, but it feels important to have it official." Joseph smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. "Emma, this changes everything and nothing. Nothing about our love for each other, our commitment to our family. Everything about the world's recognition of what we have built together." That evening, in their hotel room in Denver, Emma worked on a special letter she had been composing for weeks. She planned to send copies to all the people who had supported their family over the years, sharing news of the adoption while also announcing her acceptance of a scholarship to attend the Territorial University's teacher training program. "Dear friends," she wrote in her careful script, "I wanted to share with you the wonderful news that my adoption by Joseph Stone Bear has been legally completed. More importantly, I want you to know that I have decided to pursue advanced education so that I can return to our community as a qualified teacher, bringing back everything I learned to benefit the children and families who need support and guidance. My goal is to create educational opportunities that honor different cultural backgrounds while preparing all children for success in American society. I have learned from personal experience that the strongest communities are those that embrace diversity while maintaining shared values of love, respect, and mutual support." The letter went on to outline Emma's plans for the teacher training program and her long-term vision for establishing educational programs that would serve immigrant families and other marginalized communities throughout the Mountain Territory. "I will never forget that I am the product of one man's willingness to see potential in a desperate child and to invest his love and wisdom in helping that potential flourish. My education and my future career are ways of passing forward the gift of belonging that saved my life and shaped my character." As Emma sealed the letters that would carry news of their legal victory and her educational plans to friends throughout their valley, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. The girl who had once knocked on doors begging for work had become a young woman who was preparing to return to her community as an educated professional, ready to create opportunities for other children who needed advocates and guides. The adoption papers lay on the hotel room's small table, their official seals catching the lamplight. But more important than the legal recognition was the quiet satisfaction Emma felt about the choices they had made together. They had proven that family could be created through intention and sustained through commitment, that love could cross cultural boundaries and create something stronger than either tradition alone could provide. Tomorrow they would return to their mountain home, to the cabin where their family had been born and the community that had eventually embraced their unconventional arrangement. Emma would spend one more year at home, helping with the continuing integration of immigrant families while preparing for her university studies. Then she would venture into the wider world, carrying with her everything Joseph had taught her about courage, integrity, and the power of love to create belonging. But tonight, in a Denver hotel room with the adoption papers, officially recognizing what had always been true in their hearts. Emma Stone Bear felt the deep satisfaction of a journey completed and a legacy secured. She was legally, officially, and permanently the daughter of Joseph Stone Bear, inheritor of his name, his traditions, and his unwavering belief that family was built through choice rather than chance. The papers that made it official were important, but they were only symbols of a truth that had been evident from the moment a desperate child and a lonely man had chosen to build a life together based on love, respect, and shared commitment to each other's happiness and growth. 5 years later, Emma stood in the doorway of the one-room schoolhouse she had built with community support and her own savings from her teaching salary. At 22, she had become the kind of educator she had always dreamed of being, someone who could see potential in every child and who understood that learning happened best when students felt valued for who they were, rather than criticized for who they weren't. The afternoon sun streamed through windows that Joseph had installed with his own hands, illuminating a classroom where children from 7 different cultural backgrounds worked together on projects that honored their diverse heritages while preparing them for success in American society. Polish and Irish immigrants sat beside Apache and Mexican children, all of them learning that education was most powerful when it built bridges, rather than walls. Emma's teaching methods had attracted attention throughout the territorial education system. Her innovative approach to multicultural education, her success with students who had struggled in traditional settings, and her ability to engage entire families in the learning process had made her schoolhouse a model that other communities were eager to replicate. But today was special for a different reason. Today marked the completion of the family portrait that had been commissioned to hang in their cabin's main room, a formal photograph that would document their family's journey from desperate beginning to secure future. The photographer, a skilled professional from Denver who specialized in frontier family portraits, had arranged his equipment in their front yard, positioning Joseph and Emma against the backdrop of the home they had built together, and the garden they continued to tend with shared devotion. Joseph, now 52, carried himself with the dignity of a man who had found peace with his choices and pride in their outcomes. His hair was touched with silver, and his weathered hands showed the results of decades of honest work. But his eyes held the contentment of someone who had successfully raised a child he loved, and who had contributed meaningfully to his community. Emma wore a dress she had sewn herself, incorporating both traditional Apache designs and contemporary fashion elements that reflected her ability to honor multiple traditions while creating her own unique style. Around her neck, she wore her mother's wedding ring on its chain, while her wrist carried the Apache beadwork bracelet that had been her first symbol of belonging to Joseph's family. "This is quite remarkable," the photographer said, as he prepared his equipment, clearly impressed by the obvious bond between father and daughter. "I've photographed many frontier families, but I've rarely seen such evident mutual respect and affection." As they posed for the formal portrait, Emma reflected on all the ways their family had grown and evolved since that desperate morning when she had knocked on Joseph's door. The wooden chest she had created for future children in need had been opened twice, welcoming first a young Apache boy whose parents had died in the influenza outbreak, and later a teenage Irish girl whose family had been killed in a mining accident. Both children had thrived under Joseph's patient guidance and Emma's educational support, eventually moving on to build their own successful lives while maintaining their connection to the Stone Bear family. The pattern they had established of creating family through choice and sustaining it through love had proven sustainable and replicable. "Miss Stone Bear," the photographer said as he made final adjustments to his camera, "I understand you've been corresponding with educators in other territories about establishing similar schools. Is that correct?" Emma smiled, thinking about the letters that arrived regularly from teachers and community leaders who wanted to implement her educational methods in their own settlements. "Yes," she replied. "I've learned that the principles that made our family successful, respect for different backgrounds, emphasis on building bridges rather than walls, focus on individual potential rather than group prejudices, work just as well in educational settings as they do in family relationships. The formal portrait session lasted most of the afternoon, with the photographer capturing not just posed family images, but also candid shots of Emma and Joseph working together in their garden, teaching children from the community, and sharing quiet conversation on their front porch. Each photograph would tell part of their story, the journey from isolation to integration, from individual survival to community leadership, from desperate need to generous abundance. But the formal family portrait would be the centerpiece, a declaration that love could create belonging, and that family was defined by commitment rather than convenience. As evening approached and the photographer packed his equipment, Emma and Joseph sat together on the porch they had expanded several times over the years to accommodate the growing number of visitors who came seeking advice, assistance, or simply the comfort of being welcomed without judgment. "Papa," Emma said, her voice carrying the affection and respect that had characterized their relationship through every challenge and triumph. "When I think about everything we've built together, I'm amazed by how much has grown from that one moment when you chose to see me as a daughter, rather than just another desperate child seeking work." Joseph smiled, his gaze encompassing the thriving garden, the bustling schoolhouse, the community of families who had learned from their example that diversity could be a source of strength rather than division. "Emma, when I opened that door 7 years ago, I thought I was simply helping one frightened child. I had no idea that I was actually beginning the most important work of my life, learning how to build a family that could embrace anyone who needed belonging." The evening light cast long logs across their property, illuminating the physical evidence of their success. The expanded cabin that had housed multiple children over the years, the garden that fed not just their family but often their neighbors as well, the workshop where Joseph continued to create beautiful things while teaching traditional skills to anyone interested in learning. But the most significant evidence of their success wasn't visible in any photograph. It lived in the children they had taught, the families they had helped integrate, the community relationships they had modeled, and the expanding network of educators who were implementing their inclusive approaches in other settlements throughout the territories. "You know what I'm proudest?" Emma asked as they watched the last light fade behind the mountains that had sheltered their journey from beginning to triumphant conclusion. "What's that, daughter?" "That we proved love really is stronger than fear. We proved that family can be created intentionally rather than just accepted accidentally. We proved that differences can be sources of strength rather than barriers to overcome." Emma paused, looking toward the schoolhouse where tomorrow she would continue the work of helping children discover their own potential while honoring their diverse backgrounds. "Most importantly, we proved that home isn't about where you come from. It's about where you choose to invest your love and where you find people who value you for who you are, rather than judge you for who you aren't." Joseph reached over and took Emma's hand, feeling the calluses that came from meaningful work and the strength that came from purposeful living. "Emma Stone Bear," he said with the formal tone he used for important declarations, "you have become everything I hoped for and more than I dared to dream. You are my daughter, my pride, and my legacy. But more than that, you have become someone who makes the world more welcoming for everyone who needs a place to belong." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love freely shared, Emma felt the deep satisfaction of having found not just a home, but a purpose that honored everything she had received while creating opportunities for others to experience the same transformation. The family portrait would be ready in a few weeks, a formal documentation of their journey from desperate beginning to secure future. But the real portrait of their family was written in the lives they had touched, the community they had helped create, the model of inclusive love they had established for anyone brave enough to believe that family could be chosen and sustained through commitment rather than simply inherited and endured through obligation. Emma Stone Bear had knocked on a door seeking work and had found instead a father, a heritage, a home, and a calling. Now, As an educated woman and community leader, she spent her days opening doors for others, welcoming anyone who needed what she had found. The knowledge that they mattered, the assurance that they belonged, and the promise that love could create family bonds stronger than any accident of birth. The wooden horse Joseph had carved for her still sat on their mantelpiece. Now joined by similar toys he had made for all the children who had found temporary or permanent homes in their family. Each carved figure represented a life touched by their willingness to see potential where others saw problems, to offer belonging where others offered only judgment. As the stars emerged over their mountain valley, Emma Stone Bear felt the profound contentment of someone who had not only found her place in the world, but had learned to help others find theirs as well. She was home, finally and forever, in a family that had proven love could cross any boundary and create belonging for anyone brave enough to knock on the door and ask for a chance to be valued for who they were.